Hi, Adam. Okay, phew. Good.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
I have a person waiting by phone call, Brooke. Just by phone. All right, we're live now, Kumar, so you can go ahead.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much. This is a continuation of a fairly aggressive program of examining issues that are going to be important in the next General Assembly session. I want to thank Delegate Lehrman and her bipartisan group of who are engaging in this work group. I also want to thank the staff who've done some really terrific work. And of course, I want to thank the participants. As a way of introduction as to why this is important, I just want to reiterate the fact that, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many, many people in the United States, recycling has really failed in the United States. Prior to, in particular with respect to plastic, but it's failed generally in the United States. Before one of the bills, I think, Brooke, it was your bill on plastic, before one of the public hearings, I actually ran a brief 5-minute YouTube video about the difficulties of recycling plastic. And rather than getting into what that video said, I just want to emphasize that my attitude was that I actually ran this video past our friends at UMCES, and they said it was basically an accurate portrayal of the difficulties with respect to recycling. And so this group is going to be meeting 3 times. It is a deep dive into the issues. I will tell people that we're going to have several subcommittees doing the same sort of thing. And I want to conclude by saying that we are all hopeful that COVID-19 will not be an issue in the next General Assembly session. But as you all know, COVID-19 was an issue last year. Many, many important bills simply ran out of time. And so as the chairman of a committee, my attitude is that we are going to move forward very quickly in the beginning of the next General Assembly session with the bills that passed my committee and the entire House of Delegates, with the objective of popping it out as quickly as possible. I also, on this issue with respect to waste and recycling and other issues, I really want to begin the process of formulating what our public policy hopefully will be in a bipartisan manner before the beginning of the next General Assembly session. Because if we have another truncated session, we have no way of knowing whether or not that will be the case. I really want for the Environment and Transportation Committee to get its work done as rapidly as we possibly can in order to allow the Senate to have as much time as possible to consider seriously our proposals. And so with that, again, thank you to everybody. I'm going to pass this off to Delegate Lehrman. She's going to run the meeting. And one last recommendation I would make to the presenters. First of all, again, thank you for the tremendous amount of work that you've put into your responses. I will caution you, though, that whenever you're using jargon like acronyms like C and D, please explain what those acronyms are. I had to think about it a bit, and I'm not completely sure I know what C and D means even now. Construction and demolition, I don't know. But to begin with, I think it's important that you bear in mind that as much experience as we have in this issue area, we don't know all of the acronyms. And then finally, I do want to ask everyone to be muted when you're not speaking to the group. So I'm going to pass it off now to Delegate Lehrman, and I'm going to follow my own advice and mute myself. Thank you very much for participating.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you convening this important work group. And good morning as well to our Vice Chair, Dana Stein, and to everybody who's watching today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited about this inaugural meeting of the work group on waste reduction and recycling. Since my time coming into the General Assembly, eliminating our unnecessary waste has definitely been one of my passions. And I'd like to thank the members of the work group who've been working alongside me on this issue thus far: Jen Terrassa, Sarah Love, Andrea Harrison, Jerry Clark, Regina Boyce, and Will Wyville. Did I miss anyone? So thank you so much for joining us and working on this issue. I'm just going to give a couple opening comments to help frame where we are. You know, I think we can all agree that the pandemic has really clarified the impact that one's environment can have on their health and their well-being. And it's certainly no coincidence that COVID cases and deaths have been concentrated in areas with greater air pollution and environmental health hazards. Air pollution is caused, of course, by many factors and environmental hazards. And in the case of the virus, makes people more susceptible to serious illness or death. Air pollution, we don't always think of as related to waste, but of course it is, both in the creation of plastics and the creation of the materials that are not recyclable, and because of incineration that we have in the state. So the legislators here, we all know we have to act to create a cleaner Maryland and specifically address challenges that are being endured by communities disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards for years. So those watching this briefing on YouTube, you're probably wondering what this work group is and when it was formed and what we've been up to. So just very briefly, this work group on waste reduction and recycle was created earlier this summer by Chairman Barve after the recognition that our recycling programs are failing and we need to start thinking about more collaborative, more comprehensive, and really upstream approaches to dealing with waste and recycling. So we started by asking our county governments, which is where much of the waste collection happens, how it's going. You know, we sent questionnaires to every county government and we got responses from nearly everyone, looking at information on each county's waste, recycling, and composting programs, learning from counties about how the state can help them achieve their waste reduction and cost saving goals, and analyzing the wealth of data and feedback that we received. So a big thank you to Sarah Love, delegates Sarah Love and Jen Terrassa for helping to provide a written analysis of the responses that we received. And all of the members should have that analysis now. And I think it's safe to say that recycling looks very different across the state. Landfill capacity is a concern for many jurisdictions, and waste is disposed of in multiple ways: incineration, landfill, recycling, and composting. The county has provided us extensive feedback on how the state can help them reduce waste and costs associated with waste disposal. And I'm looking forward to hearing from them in our first panel. So the goal of these briefings is to allow for policymakers, the public, and stakeholders to learn from one another. We are providing a space for stakeholders from local government, the waste and recycling industry, community members, and environmental advocates to share their perspectives with legislators before the legislative session, so their input, your input, can inform our legislative agenda. So thank you to all of you for being here. Without further ado, we are going to move on to our first panel, and a huge thank you to Trish and Kristen for helping make this happen and for negotiating Zoom today. So we're going to start with the state of recycling and waste reduction in Maryland, a state and local government perspective. We're going to kick it off with the Maryland Department of the Environment, and then we're going to move over to our representatives of county government. So is Kaylee on? Kaylee Lalaker from the...
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, yep. So take it away.
Thank you. So good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us to be a part of this discussion. My name again is Kaylee Lalaker. I'm the Director of the Land and Materials Administration at NDE, and I was asked to just briefly touch perspective on the current state of recycling and waste reduction and the relevant state law. So as most of you probably know, MDE is responsible for administering the Maryland Recycling Act, or MRA, and that's our core recycling legislation. And the key part of that law requires each of the counties, including Baltimore City, to develop and update 10-year recycling plans. And they have the goal of meeting a minimum recycling rate, which is either 20 or 35% based on their population. So over time, the counties have made a lot of progress in this, and we've seen the statewide recycling rate climb from about 19% at the inception of the law in 1992 to about 44% today. So we have made a lot of progress. As the recycling rate increases, it does become more challenging to maintain that same level or rate of progress. So it requires thinking more creatively about what the different areas of opportunity are. And at the state level, we've focused in on a few areas over the past few years, which I'll just touch on very briefly. In 2017, the governor signed an executive order that laid out a sustainable materials management policy for the state. And sustainable materials management is a more broad, holistic approach than the traditional solid waste and recycling planning. And it really looks at what the optimal use of materials throughout their life cycle is to reduce environmental impacts. So as one part of that effort, we commissioned a statewide waste sort study to look at what are the materials that are still being wasted in Maryland. And we also worked with stakeholders to develop a new set of metrics to track not just the recycling rate, but also how much waste are we generating, and what are the environmental impacts, such as greenhouse gas emissions reductions from the way we manage material. And then another really important area of opportunity is in the reduction and recycling of surplus food. So that's something we've worked a lot on. Food scraps are the most prevalent material in the waste being disposed in Maryland. So we've done a lot of outreach events and publications. We've done regulatory guidance and streamlining for food recycling facilities. Last year, we completed a 2-year legislatively mandated study on organics diversion. So we've been working through implementing recommendations from that study. So just finally, to touch on a couple challenges, and I'm sure that others on this panel will elaborate on these, but for the past 2 to 3 years, the recycling industry as a whole has been dealing with some market challenges as a result of limitations on the import of recyclables in China and other countries. And in Maryland, as elsewhere, this has impacted local recycling programs financially. So I think that makes it more critical to grow our domestic capacity for processing and using recyclables. And it also highlights that we need to improve the quality of recyclables and reduce contamination in the recycling stream, because that is something that increases costs and makes the output less valuable. So many local governments have worked hard on that. They've increased their outreach on what does and doesn't belong in the recycling stream. Also MDE has done a social media campaign about the same issue, just encouraging people to find out what is and isn't recyclable in their jurisdiction. And then the second more recent challenge is just that every recycling program has had to adapt in some way to the COVID-19 challenges. And in addition to just logistical and staffing issues, there has been a shift in the waste stream with more residential material being generated as people are working and staying at home more. So it's shifted more towards residential from the commercial side. We published a fact sheet for the public about recycling during the pandemic, just encouraging people to continue recycling, but again, find out what you should be putting in the recycling bin and make sure that you're doing it correctly. So there's a lot of good work that's happening and progress being made. I'm sure you'll hear that from some of the local government panelists. There's also some challenges that we're going to continue to work through in the coming years. So with that, I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions.
There was one question about the executive order and subsequent study. We're going to hold most questions till after the full panel, but on this one, I thought it's a really quick one. The executive order and the study, are those on the MDE website still? I know at one point there were.
Yes, they are. We actually have a whole website that's devoted to the executive order and work that we're doing under it.
Thanks, Delegate Love, for that question. Great, thank you so much. We're going to move on to our county government, and then we're going to hear from municipal government. And then we're going to take, we'll take questions from anybody on this panel at the end. So feel free to keep sending your questions, and I'll make a note of them, and Chair Barve will also make a note of them, and we'll make sure we get to them. So I'd like to welcome first Alex Butler from MACO.
Good morning, Chair and Vice Chair, Delegate Learman, members of the work group, and the Environment and Transportation Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss waste reduction and recycling with you, and thank you for your efforts examining this issue. Today with me are representatives from 5 counties that will hopefully bring a variety of perspectives from across the state And they'll be able to provide a sense of trends occurring within each jurisdiction and then likely be able to answer any technical questions that you have. So I figured I would kick it off with a brief overview of a few general trends and some issues that counties have faced in the recycling and waste reduction arena, and then turn it over to the professionals from each jurisdiction. So Maryland is a bit different than many other states in that Maryland mandates that counties provide recycling services to residents and set recycling rates. A part of that success that many counties have in achieving higher numbers of participation comes from the accessibility of single stream recycling, oftentimes, that's available in many areas, although not 100% available. Nationally, we've become overly reliant on China as the primary recycling processor, and our reduced access to that market has caused great difficulties for counties, specifically in the revenue stream. Some Maryland counties have had to previously landfill perfectly recyclable, for instance, paper, because there's sometimes no one who will take it for processing. To respond to that challenge, counties could use better option for troublesome materials, especially something like glass, paper. We face a number of challenging products to recycle, such as paint, carpeting, and glass. And assistance with recycling or reuse options for some of these challenging materials would certainly be greatly appreciated, I'm sure, by every jurisdiction. Another challenge related to that is the massive amount of cardboard generated by the presence of, increased presence of online shopping economy through Amazon and other retailers. And that's only been exacerbated by the coronavirus as more and more people increasingly turn to online shopping to wisely avoid the crowds in stores, and also early on when shelves were empty. This has flooded a limited recycling market, at least in the Maryland region. And of course, there we have the landfill issue. So every state handles recycling a little differently, but I think one commonality among states is the importance of recycling revenue for these local governments on the ground that handle the recycling and that have to run the recycling programs. Most of the time, recycling revenues are not enough to cover the entire cost of the recycling program, but they do help minimize additional costs. So programs or mandates that divert revenues should ideally be avoided. Further education efforts to sort of increase public knowledge of exactly what materials are able to be recycled and to increase the awareness of the importance of recycling could significantly help reduce contamination, lead to more participation, and help with litter reduction efforts. We hear repeatedly that re-education and outreach efforts can be particularly burdensome, although I know many departments, many jurisdictions are making efforts to access residents through social media and other sorts of outreach campaigns, the development of an app, for example, in Anne Arundel County. Because as you know, the recycling symbol does not necessarily always mean that product can be processed. And these products in the stream increase costs and contamination, increasing the burden on local jurisdictions. I'll end on a success. So food and organic waste composting is certainly an emerging area that more counties are looking at possibly launching or expanding programs, whether it be recycling or whether it be through collection or implementing and adding more central drop-off locations. Infrastructure and processing is desperately needed in that arena, and is something the federal government could certainly help with by providing incentives as opposed to mandates to encourage the development and the feasibility of processing facilities. So I will end there. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to
Great.
Mr. Steve Lafferty.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to hear from some of our local officials. We're going to hear first from Steve Lafferty, former delegate Steve Lafferty, who's now the Chief Sustainability Officer of Baltimore County. Adam Ortiz, the Director of the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. Then Phil Harris, the Department Head of the Frederick County Department of Solid Waste Management. Then Julie Paluda, the Deputy Director of Enterprise Fund Operations at the Calvert County Department of Public Works. And finally, Nicholas Zirkin, the Solid Waste Manager for St. Mary's County. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Learman and Chairman Barbe and Vice Chair Stein and members of the committee. Thanks for inviting me to be here today. Let me start off with a little context for Baltimore County. At this point, we landfill almost 82% of all the waste that we receive. We don't do any incineration, although we have been sued by Wheelabrator for failing to provide them the waste that we had previously. We operate a transfer station that sends trash out of state for incineration and or landfilling, probably in Virginia. We recycle 18% of the waste we get. We have yard waste composting, no food scrap or food waste composting at this time. And we've tried to engage in reuse and reduction education, with some success. At this point, we are actually receiving and landfilling over 1,800 tons a day. This is 3 times greater than it was in 2014. And as Kaylee commented, a lot of this has to do with an increase in residential waste that's been generated during COVID. But obviously, this doesn't totally tell the story if you're going back 3 or 4 years. So we're seeing, in part, fewer and fewer materials that are actually recyclable. I'm not saying they're not going into recycling, because they are. But in fact, in Baltimore County in 2019, FY19, we collected almost 60,000 tons of recyclables, but only 40,000 were actually recoverable for sale or for reuse as recycled products. That meant 20,000 tons of allegedly recyclable materials were not recycled, but in fact were landfilled. Yet we got credit for all 60,000 tons. So one of the flaws is that the count for what is being recycled, and Kayla used the figure 44%, is inaccurate, because that's not how much is really being recycled. That is how much is going into recycling before it actually is sorted. So a lot of that is due to contamination. It's already been mentioned. To the chat question from Delegate Boyce, we see in Baltimore County a lot of the plastics, such as the clamshells, are not recyclable because we don't have a market for them. Also, pizza boxes or any materials that have any cardboard that has contamination, grease, whatever, is also a product that we see constantly. I question, though I'm not going to go beyond where our solid waste people are, whether single stream really is the best way to proceed, since contamination can be accelerated. I will say that, as Alex said, fluctuating markets make it even more challenging. We are actually bidding out almost monthly to find out what is the best market, best price we can get for any materials. Aluminum still remains a very important one, as well as cardboard. The county has established a reuse directory, trying to encourage residents to reuse whatever products they have, finding different mechanisms for redistribution, whether it's building materials that they can get rid of, electronics, and others. We have finally, after 7 years hiatus, been able to reestablish a glass recycling initiative. This is another item that gets crushed and lost, often in the regular waste, and cannot be reutilized. We have found a contractor who's able to take our glass, clean it, and we take the residue. We have just started that process, so it's going to be a while before we see how effective and efficient that is. But we have hopefully found a mechanism for taking glass, which fewer others are able to do. We are also starting to look at anaerobic digestion and whether or not that is another mechanism for our food waste. We at the Eastern Sanitary Landfill are now capturing the methane and converting that into energy. We have a partnership with a company called EPP out of Pennsylvania, who is taking that methane and reutilizing it as a renewable product. And within the county, we set up a committee of employees called Green at Work. And one of their missions really is to challenge all employees to reduce the waste that they are generating. Now, since COVID, of course, very few employees are physically in the offices. So that, as well as another item that we are in hiatus. Couple of the challenges: behavioral change. Those of you who have been on ENT for a while remember other discussions like how can we enforce people wearing helmets on motorbikes and other items that question, how do you change behaviors? Well, behavioral change is going to be critical if we're going to increase the recycling of products that are in fact reusable. We have to implement changes that don't endanger public health and recognize the potential for environmental injustice. And with that, the question for me is, how do you end incineration without a viable alternative? I'm not supporting incineration, only that we have to look at alternatives before we actually phase out what incineration is in place. Certainly the contamination of recyclables is a critical issue, and that goes back to what the chairman said earlier about plastics and what plastics are in fact can be reused or not. Delegate Stein had a bill last year that was going to look at developing markets and creating a mechanism, I think within MDE, that actually would have developed a strategy for taking our waste and creating markets for that material. How do we take plastics and make products that are reusable? How do we take other waste and find creative solutions, which perhaps involves state funding or resources? Certainly there's an inadequacy of education.
30 seconds.
Okay. Lastly, the food composting issue needs to be addressed. Delegate Charkoudian had a bill last year that would be a great start in order to change the technologies and focus on institutional composting before we move into residential. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Adam?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and advocates and colleagues. It's good to see everybody in one place. Great to have you in my home office. I'm sure we're going to be repeating a lot of information today, so I'm just going to hit a couple points and do a little bit of a deeper dive on, I think, an issue that's very consequential regarding the labeling of recyclable materials. But I would urge out of the gate just to underscore some of the things that have been said, to focus on statewide strategies on food recovery and other organics. For construction and demolition recovery, those two areas are two big chunks of the waste stream that are going into landfills and going into incinerators. So those are two big ones that it's not rocket science to deal with them, but it does require some commitment to do so. Second related point is I'd also like to urge the state into encouraging regional solutions and help fund them. These are very capital intensive endeavors, huge. Tens of millions of dollars. We're in the process now of trying to upgrade our recycling center in Montgomery County, and it's a minimum of probably $30 million. And I'd encourage the state to try to think of waste is a state issue. It's not unlike schools or transportation. And it would be helpful to have some skin in the game. And I know folks on the call support that, but the counties are sort of left on our own. We're always competing with our own budgets for police stations and fire departments in the capital budget. So some assistance would be helpful, and regionalism. The counties, we are too siloed. That's on us. We need to work. Montgomery needs to work more closely with Frederick and Howard, for example, to see how we can share facilities and build them. But thinking of a regional approach in partnership with the state would be a big step forward. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive, is and I drive my staff crazy about this, but I think the recycling system, although we've come a long way, as Kaylee has said, in the last 40 years, we have not upped our game in a lot of ways, in the way that in what we expect of the residents, what we expect of governments, and what we expect of the manufacturers. So a major issue, Alex hit on it earlier, is that there's a lot of plastics in the stream that are just not recyclable. And the problem with that is that that is a cost that is externalized onto us. And I'll give you an example. So I have a tale of two cups here. This one is a number 6 cup. You may recall the term polystyrene, styrofoam. So this is non-expanded polystyrene. It is not recyclable. This costs Montgomery County about $60 to process, but actually it's $130 to process, because people look at it, they see the recycling symbol on the bottom, they put it in the recycling bin, it comes to us. It costs us about $75 or $80 to process any material in the recycling facility. In this case, we have to pull it out, then we have to send it to the incinerator. So that's another $70. So this cup is costing us about $130, $140 a ton. This cup is a #1 plastic. This plastic makes us right now about $350 or $400 a ton. This cup is worth money. So I don't think we should have this in the waste stream. And in the county, we just introduced a bill banning #6 plastics. So this is an extension of the styrofoam ban, the polystyrene ban, to this material, so we get more of this material. So that's one piece. There's stuff in the waste stream that should not be there if there's a viable alternative. But bigger issue here is that manufacturers should not get away with putting the recycling symbol on things that are not recyclable in a county facility. Here's another one. We're all familiar with this one, and I know Delegate Love and other leaders have been looking at plastic bags, and we've all dealt with them. This has the recycling symbol on it too. And sure, it's recyclable if you take it to the grocery store and put it in a special bin. But to the average person, they're going to look at this and they'll be like, oh, okay, I can put this in the recycling bin. A lot of contamination still in Montgomery County. We've been educating people for years. We send them a mailer every year at their doorstep, telling them not to put that in the recycling stream, but they still do. So the manufacturers need to be held accountable. We started this discussion with EPA, I think 6 weeks ago. We were like, this is a problem. Why don't you guys step up and have some national standards that you have to earn and prove that your material is actually recyclable before you throw this label on, because it's a cheap label. Anybody can kind of throw it on and get away with it. We were told from them that it's a Federal Trade Commission issue having to do with product labeling. So now we're looking into that and trying to figure that out. But my question to the state is, can the state do something? Can the state require a certain threshold for materials to be able to earn this symbol? Because at the end of the day, we're all paying for it. You know, in our case, we're spending $130 for this stupid cup right here per ton, when this one could be making us money. So I don't know if that's in the what the state authority is on that, but I wanted to raise that because we are dealing with an overwhelming amount of products that are just not processable.
Thank you. Very helpful and interesting. Phil?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My colleagues brought up some excellent information, particularly on the regional approach. That's been a pet peeve of mine. I'll try and keep it short. You're going to hear a lot of reoccurring themes, and I'm going to go through this really quick. If it seems like I'm trying to go really fast, it's because I am. I've got a ton of information I want to share with you, pun intended. So our department is a self-funded branch of Frederick County government. We're a business entity, and we have to balance the business of the services that we provide with the environment. So that can be a challenge, as you can imagine. So we're much like other counties. We've got a variety of programs. I'm not going to speak to a lot of those today. I want to focus on our most visible one, which is our curbside recycling program, which goes to about 81,000 homes on a biweekly basis. Collection is handled via a contract with a private collection company. The collection is single stream, and the processing of those recyclables is also handled via contract with a private sector processor, materials recovery facility. We call them MRFs. Because of Frederick County's location or distance from those MRFs, we do have to tractor trailer this material to the facilities, which is an additional cost. So our challenges are much like you're going to hear today and much like others are facing. It's the cost to deliver those services. And what I want to try and give the committee today is a sense of how much those costs have increased. First of all, our cost to actually go out and collect those materials has increased substantially. Our cost to have those materials processed has increased substantially, and the value of those materials has gone down substantially. So for order of magnitude, in 2016, we were paying $3.24 per home per month for biweekly collection of recycling services. We're now paying $3.91 per home, which is an 18% increase. And we're looking at cost indicators that show that those prices will go over $5.70 per home in early 21, which is an additional 32% increase. So Frederick County, by early next year, will be looking at 50% cost increases just to go out and get the material in a span of 5 short years. putting that into a fiscal perspective, that now will cost us over $5.5 million annually to go out and collect approximately 22,000 tons of gross residential recycling material. Steve brought it up a very good point. When I say gross material, it's not all recyclable. It's not netted out. That, just to put that into perspective, that equates to about $253 per ton just for the residential recycling. And although it's not an apples to apples comparison, when you do compare that to our cost to dispose of waste, which is about $54 a ton for transportation and disposal, it shows how exceedingly high those cost values for one management component of the county's recycling programs has risen in just a short time. Quickly moving on, I want to speak to the processing cost. But first, I want to remind the group that the recyclable materials that are collected at the curb, at that state and in that component, they're simply a part of the waste stream, and really they don't have any value, or they have little value until they're processed into the discrete commodities that someone is actually willing to pay for them or buy them. Without this processing step, they have little to no value. So it's important to recognize that this processing costs money. We're now paying in Frederick County $95 per ton to have these processed, which is a 24% increase from just 2 short years ago. During those 2 short years, the value of this very same material has dropped 77%. What that value represents is in 2018, we were getting back about $1.4 million for the value of those recyclables, and that money was used to offset other recycling costs. Now, for that same volume of material in 2020, we're only getting back about $340,000, and that roughly $1 million has to come from somewhere else within our enterprise fund. So when you combine the cost increase for collection and processing and the devaluation of the materials, the cost to deliver that one program has more than doubled in 4 short years. And as others have mentioned, a lot of this is caused by more stringent market requirements. And as markets have tightened or closed, the material recovery facilities have had to slow down their processing lines. They've had to increase human or hand sorting, and they've also rejected a lot of material that they previously would accept in order to control cost and deliver quality usable materials in these tough market conditions. Many local governments, such as Frederick County, have had to increase their focus on education and outreach and the importance of recycling the right materials, and also, unfortunately, announced elimination of certain materials or the discontinuation of accepted practices that may have been customary for more than 10 years. Let me give you a real quick example of that. A lot of us were accustomed to, whether right or wrong, putting materials out in plastic bags. It eliminated the uck factor or the yuck factor. We had the MRFs crack down on that. They just simply were throwing things away. So we had to re-educate the public that this was either not allowed, depending on where you're at, or that this enforcement was lax because of market allowances. This paradigm shift had to occur quickly, and to speak frankly, the public wasn't necessarily prepared to embrace that. So educating the public on new or perhaps not enforced rules has been a challenge for many governments. Yep. It is particularly problematic when we don't have consistent messaging or consistent program rules or applications throughout the state. That gets back to some of that regional concept. On achieving quick.
So I'm going to cut you off in like 15 seconds.
Okay. We have been able to reduce that contamination or residual rate from 19% down to 10%, which does have a fiscal impact on us. And I've got some thoughts on source reduction that I'll hold for later.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Julie.
Good morning, esteemed panelists and members of this work group. My name is Julie Paluda. I'm the Deputy Director for Enterprise Fund Operations for Calvert County. We're located in Southern Maryland, and I'm going to speak for waste handling and recycling for the citizens and small businesses for Calvert County, with the exception of 2 incorporated municipalities, the town of Chesapeake Beach and North Beach. Solid waste and recycling is a division of the Department of Public Works for Calvert County. Our mission statement is to provide all customers with efficient, cost-effective, reliable, and safe management of Calvert County's solid waste and recycling activities. We currently do not have a composting program. We run the waste collection. We oversee alternative waste programs like household hazardous waste events, paper shredding, tree debris collection, and recycling. Recyclables are dropped off by consumers, and approximately 20% of households participate in dual stream recycling annually. Our convenience center and landfill operators, truck drivers, and vendors collect mixed paper and cardboard, glass and plastic, mixed rigid plastic, metal, brush and tree debris, tires, batteries, mattresses, textiles, all kinds of propane cylinders, fire extinguishers, motor oils, antifreeze, and oil filters, printer cartridges, cell phones, x-rays and MRIs, lamp and light bulbs, electronics and CRTs and TVs. The proportion of Calvert waste that is recycled is currently 26%, and the rest, or 74%, is landfilled. The mixed paper and cardboard, glass and plastics and metal goes to material recovery facilities, as you all know as MRFs. All other items are sent to various contract markets. The prices that are paid for our recyclable materials vary, as was been mentioned by many of you. Some of our contracts are set up to adjust monthly based on respective material or market price indexes. Prices are both positive and negative for us and can fluctuate throughout the year depending on supply and demand. Some contracts are fixed priced. The cost to collect and haul vary. Some items have separate transportation charges, and some include transportation costs right in the material value. The overall recycling program is not self-sufficient for us, not self-sustaining, and is factored into the cost to operate the solid waste division. And I think that was just discussed moments ago. Calvert County uses a transfer station to dispose of solid waste, which is transferred out of state to a certified disposal facility. This process preserves our limited space at our county landfill to be used for non-acceptable materials at the transfer station and in emergency situations. And we're considering continuing this practice into the next 20 years. However, we'd like to increase our overall recycling rate going into the future. We do have education and outreach. We do provide recycling services for our county facilities, and we do work with our public schools and our private schools for education and outreach. We currently have a little over a $9 million capital improvement plan. We're going to be building a new transfer station in the next 5 years and upgrading 2 customer convenience centers. We do not have curbside pickup. We have customer convenience centers. During COVID-19, we suspended certain operations to limit potential exposure, as many of you probably also did in your jurisdictions, suspending bulk item pickups, some textile and paper shredding events. We have recently lifted some of those events. We resumed those, but our tonnages, we did recognize that our tonnages stayed consistent. It was just the business tonnages kind of dropped and the residential tonnages picked up. One area that I'd like to discuss that I feel maybe that the state legislation may make in this group here that we could consider evaluating would be assisting the smaller rural counties in meeting the Maryland Recycling Act reporting requirement with populations less than 150,000 to recycle 20% of their waste. Except for a few counties, businesses in Maryland recycle on a voluntary basis. They may do so because it saves them money on their waste disposal fees. Because businesses may be paid at market value for recyclables, they may find trash disposal costs reduce as a result of recycling, but they're not mandated to recycle, and they're not mandated to report on their recycling. So businesses are not required or mandated to report annually And counties are finding that collecting the recycling information from businesses is extremely labor intensive and costly. And because businesses are not mandated to report, counties truly do not know what their true total county recycling rate is. So I'd like to close with asking that this work group consider working with legislation that would mandate businesses to report recycling tonnages and methods annually for local jurisdictions.
Thank you for that. You will be pleased to know that Delegate Stephanie Smith had that bill last year, and I will make sure that she knows to connect with you before the next legislative session. So,
what was the success? It
did not pass because we were because of the time crunch, but that's why we're doing these work groups to understand where the real need is. So thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to, I'm going to take a few questions now because there are a few, and then we're going to move on to the municipal governments. So we'll start with Chairman Barve, who had a quick question.
Yes, thank you, Delegate Lehrman. Adam, of course, I'm an accountant, so I love numbers. And you held up two recyclable products and gave us costs and revenues per ton. Would you be able to do that for all of the major categories of waste that you handle, plastics, glass, and that sort of thing? And actually, this is a question to all the counties who are able to produce that kind of information. I think that kind of cost or benefit information would be very helpful to me and my committee. And I have another particular little question that maybe somebody can answer. What becomes of this coffee mug? I broke a coffee mug and I just threw it in the garbage because I didn't know what to do with it. And I am curious to know, and in Montgomery County, everything goes to the incinerator pretty much, I guess. What is the ideal way to handle this?
If you can pot a plant in it, we would suggest that. If you have crazy glue, perhaps it could be reused, but yeah, I'm afraid it's not recyclable, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. And I think that's a great question on the cost, and maybe that's something MACO could work with its members to create a chart for us to share on how much things cost and how much their value, how much they're worth. Vice Chair Stein, go ahead.
Thank you, Delegate. Steve Lafferty mentioned that, in his opinion, it would be helpful if the state supported and encouraged more composting efforts. And I guess I just wanted to ask other county representatives how you felt about that. Is composting, recycling of food scraps a potential area for increased recycling that the state could be helpful with?
Anybody want to take a swing at that? Or MACO?
I'm happy to do it. And I was involved in the creation of the Prince George's facility. There's at the grassroots, there's so much interest in food scrap composting. We hear it all the time. And people are voluntarily paying an extra $20, $30, or $50 to private companies doing it. So I think the demand is there. You know, we've seen the environmental need for doing it. The struggle is with the facilities, that there's just not quite enough facilities that are accessible. So Mr. Vice Chair, yes, I think so. And I think, regional solutions are the way to go. They aren't terribly expensive, but it's the toughest part is to find the right facilities. And the more urban counties might struggle with that more than the rural counties, but perhaps a partnership could solve that puzzle.
Thank you.
And I'll build off of that, just the regionalism. Several of you mentioned that. If there are specific things that you think the state could do to encourage regionalism, that's probably an involved answer, but I think we would be interested in knowing what those incentives are or how the state could help play a role in that. So perhaps MACO, perhaps Alex, you could gather some of those responses and ideas on how the state can play a role in regionalism and send some after the fact to us as well. Would that be possible?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Delegate Regina Boyce had a couple questions.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. And I don't know if you all know this, but what would the upfront cost be for counties to start creating processing facilities and the potential revenue that it could or would not bring? For those who don't, like I know Julie mentioned that they don't because they just don't have the ability.
It's been a few years for me, but the cool thing about food scrap composting is you don't have to, it's not like a MRF recycling facility. We have to build this huge thing all at once. It can be sort of scaled up. So in Prince George's, I think the initial investment was $2.3 million. That was able to process something like 4,000 or 5,000 tons. And Kaylee, maybe you can help me remember what those numbers was. So it wasn't hard to get in. The tough part was just finding the space. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Potential revenue or not.
Potential revenue, thank you. At the right scale, so that facility has grown up a little bit. Now I think it's taking about 50,000 tons. And when we penciled it out, it was about a break even. But one thing that's helpful to think about is that it's not necessarily, when we're thinking about the waste stream, it's not necessarily, is this making money or not? To my colleague in Frederick County, it's like, is this cheaper than sending it to the incinerator? Or is this cheaper than sending it to a landfill? So even if it only loses, maybe $10 or $20 a ton, that's still a net savings from just disposing it. But yeah, compost has a future because there's definitely demand for the material in the agricultural sector and retail. And just one last point, I know there's a lot of questions. So the compost product that some of the counties make with the Maryland Environmental Service, Leaf Grow and Leaf Grow Gold, they sell out by about June of every year. And even myself, last month, I went down the street to my local nursery and I was like, I'd like 3 bags of Leaf Grow. And they're like, sorry, they're not making that anymore this year. So the demand for the product is so high, which, suggests that the numbers are good.
Thanks. And just a follow-up question with that. So I purchased a composting service that I believe that goes to Prince George's County. And so I'm wondering if anybody knows the cost I pay as it relates to the company that picks up, as it relates to the actual space where it's taken. So like the relationship in that regard, is it just paying for that company to pick and dump? Or, what is the cost potentially of the company then to pay to dump? Does anybody know?
I can speak to that, but I'm happy for others to jump in and rescue me. So I think the cost stack is the capital cost of the company. So the truck, the operating costs of the driver, transportation cost, fuel, it's a long drive from Baltimore to Prince George's County. And then the tip fee. And so the tip fee, I think, out of county in Prince George's County, I think is $49 a ton or $53 a ton. So that helps the facility make money when people are coming to dump it, to tip that material over there. But all that probably goes into what you're paying at the curb delegate. Does that answer your question?
A bit. I'll ask one final question. So earlier, I know with COVID, we're all home and we're all, using more, putting out more trash, food waste, as well as more, using more water. And so when it was mentioned that there is more residential trash, I'm wondering, is that a shift or is it more? In other words, if I wasn't home, I'd be in my Annapolis office or at somewhere else, like dumping trash in different places. So I'm wondering, is there an increase or is it just a shift? If that makes sense.
Good question.
It's Delegate Boyce's Steve Lafferty. It's a shift. What we've seen in Baltimore County, at least, is there's much less commercial trash being picked up and the residential, but the residential far outstrips the commercial. It's
Right.
much greater percentage now. And maybe it's because more people are cleaning out their closets or doing whatever else they're doing where they weren't home before, but the commercial side has dropped off.
Okay, so it's a shift. It's probably more of a shift than it is an increase, but still an increase in residential, but
Well, it's an increase, but it's a greater percentage of increase in the residential than the drop off on the commercial, but the commercial has dropped off substantially as well.
so together, what would be just a typical
Ooh.
tonnage for commercial and residential?
I don't know, but I could find out from Baltimore County what we've seen since March.
Thank you.
Delegate Boyce, I can give you a rough number here as a trash hauler.
Okay.
What we took.
We're going to have to move on. So just be brief.
Yeah, we saw about 500 tons go up, and we dumped 1,350 tons in a Peel landfill in Calvert in February, and we were over 1,800 in May.
Okay.
Wow. Interesting. Thank you. Delegate Ann Healy has a question.
Mute. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I think Kumar did ask my question, which was really about whether there's a available anywhere cost benefit analysis about going back to having the residents do the sorting of the recyclables before they're picked up, and have all the different kinds of trucks you have to do that, and all of those kind of things, because the market has changed so much. Has anybody looked at that yet as an economic thing? Maybe Adam.
Poor Adam.
There's, I think, consensus now that it's certainly more cost effective to have dual stream, to separate paper. If European countries and Asian countries that have very high recycling rates have even more separation, more source separation. So it is seen as a best practice. The pushback is how complicated is this, and how expensive is it, and how hard is it to administer? I'm not familiar with a cost benefit analysis that's at that level, but I think there's general buy-in to the concept, but also defer to Katie, who may have a better perspective than I do.
Yeah, just when we first started doing recycling, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
When we first started doing recycling in Prince George's County, we got multiple box things when we could put the newspapers in paper bags, and we could put the glass and the cans in a bin, and everything was picked up they're all picked up the same day, but left out at the curb in different boxes and stuff. And I wondered, I mean, there is some history of how that was done. I don't know, it may be ancient history, so it doesn't matter, but I'd like to know, maybe somebody in Mako or someone else in the industry might know if there's a major advantage because of the change in the way things are purchased. It's just.
Can I say
Yes,
something?
go ahead. Yep.
So in Calvert, we don't have curbside pickup. Our customers bring their recyclables to the customer convenience centers, and so they have to separate because they're bringing it to the customer convenience centers. Well, I should say they don't have to. They could actually bag it all up and throw it into the waste stream. But ones that choose to recycle do have to separate in order to recycle. So there's there is that option. That if you're behaviorally going to have your consumers bring their waste to a customer convenience center, you're going to have the different places where they're going to have to separate out their recyclables. And that's behaviorally, they're going to have to separate.
Great.
So either you can do it with recycle boxes at a station, or you can do it at the curb.
Thank you. So we have questions from Jerry Clark, Delegate Clark, and then Delegate Love. And then we need to move on to the next panel. So, and we have about 4 minutes to get through these. So go for it. Delegate Clark.
As always, my questions will be quick. First statement is speaking about the recyclable cups, the 6 and the 1. When I seen that, I jumped up and went out in my store, because I'm at my store, and looked at all the cups I have. And trust me, they're all number 6s. So I will be looking at that to see what the difference is. I didn't know there was a difference before today. So I learned something. My other question is, as we go through this, and I listened to the panelists, they talk about composting, they talk about recycling metal, glass, plastic. Is there a priority that we should be looking at, a list that what is the worst and what should we start with to try to change consumer mentality and work towards? Is cardboard and plastic a bigger issue than, say, composting at a restaurant, or is the thought process that we're going to look at this thing as one great big massive recycling issue? Because I'm afraid we may get bogged down in so many segments, because there's different segments of this recycling industry. And I was wondering if any of the panelists could comment on whether we should start with one particular part of it and move forward from that way.
Plastic. It's got to be the different plastics, and whether it's the non-expanded polystyrene that Adam raised or not, because that's not going to break down. Ultimately, cardboard will deteriorate. It's not the same, but it's the focus on plastics, which is really probably the hardest as well, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. And you'd be proud of me, Steve. I voted for the plastic bag bill last year.
All right.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Good man.
Jerry, my response would be, if it's renewable or non-renewable would be my response. So my response would be, I would think the focus would be like metals, because it's a non-renewable type of material. So
you mean renewable, don't you?
I'm sorry, renewable. So no, but so it's you have to go out and you have to you have to mine it, and you have to take it from the earth. Whereas it's not a plastic, it's a plastic, and it's a man-made thing. And so whereas you're taking a metal is you have to it's a renewable type of thing. So that would be where I would say that would be where you should focus on your that would be my heavy focus, would be trying to recycle something that you could preserve, going out and mining something again and again and again. So
thank you, Julie. Thank you, Brooke. Thank
you. Delegate Love.
Thank you, Delegate Learman, and thanks to all of our panelists. A quick footnote to the renewable. Let's not forget that plastics are coming from fossil fuels. So that is something that we need to face as well. I have 2 questions, starting with Director Ortiz. You had a very long list of ideas of changes to the Maryland Recycling Act. And as I went through all of the county's responses, several other counties mentioned the MRA and the need for changes to it. Can you explain to us why that's important?
Well, I think we all want to get credit where credit is due. And I'll, I also welcome Kaylee to jump in. And, I I was around 40 years ago, but I wasn't involved in writing it, so I don't know the justification for necessarily all the materials. But for example, there's some materials like oils and grease that can be recycled in some categories, but it's not counted toward the MRA, and then in others, it is. Construction and demolition debris is not counted towards our recycling numbers, although it can be recycled as well. Colleague from Calvert and others have mentioned materials that that we're not necessarily getting credit for. So perhaps there's justification, and I don't want to second guess MDE. There might be good reasons for that, but it might be time to revisit the categories and seeing has the industry changed from when the policies were first written, and can we get more credit where credit is due?
Okay, thanks. And I think along with some of the other comments in terms of the amount ticket in that you are credited for, but actually that's not the amount recycled. It's a lot about really understanding the state of recycling. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, no question about it. And I think that there's a little bit of an elephant in the room about, as Steve mentioned and others have reinforced that that there's stuff coming in to the recycling facility that goes right to a landfill, or we just need to have truth in recycling across the board, just so we know what we're talking about, so we can address the issue.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, and I'll wrap it up quickly, Delegate Learman, is for Phil. Phil, you mentioned you had some source reduction comments. I think one of the things that we're all understanding is we can't recycle our way out of this. We have to use all 3 R's. We have to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So Phil, can you quickly let us know those source reduction comments that you had?
Sure. Thank you for asking. I was hoping we'd get back to that, and this ties into what Adam said and what one of the members of the committee spoke about is where we should focus. I mean, in Frederick County, we place a great deal of emphasis on waste elimination, or what the state calls source reduction. And they have a credit system that ties in with the Maryland Recycling Act. And in general, Frederick County's been able to achieve the full 5% allowed under this, this program for conducting this education and outreach activity to reduce the volume of waste. That is the top of the hierarchy. If you don't have to manage a waste, it's the least costly and most environmentally preferable way to handle waste. However, what we've learned through the COVID thing is a lot of this work is based on old things that are dated, print literature, in-person outreach to businesses, to fairs, to community events, festivals. The pandemic's changed all that. I mean, we're not having fairs, we're not having festivals, we're not really giving people print literature. And frankly, the way our youth and the people that are buying homes and coming into the workforce get educated and get their outreach has changed. A lot of it's virtual now. So there's been some talk about changing that. And I have unfortunately been around for 40 years, and I was involved and participated when they set this up originally. And we need to revisit that. There's been talk with MDE of revisiting that. No fault of MDE. We just haven't got back to it. You know, they have other priorities. They get tasked with challenges. But I would encourage the group to push to get back to that work, and let's revitalize that source reduction credit system so that we can have more tools to do education and outreach and eliminate our waste, and do it in a more modern virtual space. And it would be less wasteful in both the way it's applied as well as the messaging. Thank you.
Source reduction is really the top preference, and we should really be putting a lot more emphasis on that. So we did make some improvements to the source reduction checklist at that time. We added a category that allows the counties to propose a source reduction initiative that's not on the checklist, just to try to promote some innovative ideas that the counties may have that maybe we weren't accounting for before. But I think we're open to continuing to improve that. And if people have other ideas about how we should be structuring and accounting for source reduction, then we would be happy to look at that issue.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to move on to representatives from municipal government. Justin, Alyssa, and Mike. Justin, if you guys could keep it to about 3 to 4 minutes each, and then we're going to move quickly to our next panel. So Justin.
Understood. Thank you, Delegate Learman, Chairman Barbay, members of the committee, and other esteemed colleagues on the call. Government Relations Manager here at the Maryland Municipal League. And I just want to say the state of municipal recycling can best be described as steady. As you've heard, the recycling economy hasn't really leaped forward the way we were hoping for, and has in fact backtracked some. But that really hasn't stopped our city and towns from providing these services to their residents. Right now, close to 100 members provide curbside recycling programs, and that's consistent with where it's been for the last decade and a half or so since we started surveying. It's also common for towns like Morningside to issue bins to residents and their small businesses. Many are switching to single stream. We've talked about the challenges with that, but it has led or increased the overall recycling numbers. Hyattsville, for example, or Hagerstown increased 250% since 2012 when they started their single stream program. Many of the municipalities that have curbside also do a leaf recycling program. And increasingly, cities and towns are organizing community composting. 30 have specific programs for electronics, and that's also a number that's increased in the last decade. Some have gone further. The city of Hyattsville, for example, they have programs for paint recycling and fluorescent bulb recycling. They also have automotive oil recycling programs and more. More and more, we're also seeing folks find new ways to reuse or sell materials instead of landfilling them, especially when they can't be recycled. I'll just add here that this is a topic municipal officials continue to discuss and look for best practices. Last summer, our conference committee, which is comprised from officials across the state, chose the future of recycling and zero waste as one of their workshops. And I believe Chaz Miller on the call was a presenter at that. Honestly, that was a little bit bleak, especially for the small scale recyclers. But I just want to say and reiterate that our numbers are holding steady, even though the economy isn't necessarily there. And when we talk about a regional approach, that may have some solutions to the small scale problems municipalities are currently facing. But right now, this is just a responsibility that our cities and towns won't shy away from. Thank you for your time. I will pass it over to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Justin, for all your work. So we're going to turn it over to Alyssa Hastings, the Sustainability Coordinator for Salisbury, and then we're going to hear from Mike Benton, the Mayor of the town of North Beach. Alyssa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Just bear with me for one moment. I'm going to share my screen. I just created a couple slides to share with you all today. Okay. So I'm Alyssa Hastings. As I said, I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Salisbury. So Salisbury is a medium-sized city on the Eastern Shore. We've got around 35,000 residents, and we're really proud of our natural resources, and along with that, our environmental policies that go hand in hand. So before COVID-19, we actually realized, as a result of China putting these policies in place that influence the recycling market in the US, that we needed to do a lot to educate our residents about how to recycle correctly. We were seeing a lot of contamination and a lot of confusion about what could or couldn't be recycled. So we created this campaign called Recycle Right SBY, and we would go out to residents and businesses and talk about recycling. We'd participate in community events, put information on social media, and really try to just get the information out there for how to recycle correctly. And we've been very successful with that. We saw a 10% increase in our recycling in fiscal year 18 and a 15% increase in fiscal year 19. We also launched in 2018 curbside cardboard pickup. So before that time, we did not have cardboard recycling in the city. So we saw an increase in our recycling numbers due to that as well. So this is an example of just something we would do at Third Fridays. We'd hand out our recycling bins, just make sure that everyone knew about the recycling program. And we have a curbside program. So this is an example of one of our recycling trucks that would go out. We actually separate every single bin at the curb, which is a little bit different than other municipalities. So residents put their recycling out with their trash on their waste collection day, and then our crews go out and actually sort every single bin to make sure that there's no contamination. And so that was very successful until this past March when COVID happened. So COVID actually really impacted our recycling programs, unfortunately, because we take all of our recycling to Wycomico County, and they lost their inmate labor back in March. They contract to help their recycling programs. And this is a picture that someone sent me earlier this year of their their recycling centers that we have throughout the county, essentially just going into the landfill because they lost their inmate labor, so they were not able to sort their recycling. So unfortunately with recycling, even though we have these convenience centers where people go and put their recycling, it's often very contaminated, and then that's where they would have another layer of sorting. So that's where we are as of right now with our recycling programs. But I'm confident that once the Wycomico County recycling programs are able to start again, we will be able to offer our recycling programs as well. We also have been going through, I just wanted to mention, a very comprehensive sustainability planning process for the city. And we hope to have solid waste goals, recycling goals come out of that as well. We're also very interested in, as other colleagues have mentioned, diverting waste through composting. We'd even love to see, we're even open to something like a pay-as-you-throw program. We're very open to any ideas, but we are limited at the moment with sort of what we can recycle. So just trying to get the word out there to residents. I know a lot of people have been very confused with us having to put our programs on pause. So we'll have to do a lot of educating again once our programs can come online. But as people have mentioned, recycling is not perfect, but it's something that is important, and we're always trying to improve our programs. So if anyone has any questions about that, that's my information. And I'm just happy to be with you all today.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Benton.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And Delegate Clark, don't worry, I jumped up too. And in my town hall, it says number 6 too. So I'm not really sure what to do now. So now I'm going to freak out and look at every cup I've ever seen now. But thank you for the information. Just a couple of things about our town. We have 1,922 residents as of now. Obviously, the census, we believe we're going to get over 2,000. So Salisbury, too bad. Just kidding. Getting back to that, 2017, we recycled about 239 tons. In 2019, we're up to 311 tons. We also do single stream, and we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to learn. One of the areas that we're really focused on is we do a lot between Memorial Day and Labor Day. We have a small town. We're 0.34 square miles, but we bring over 100,000 visitors to our town between that time period. That means we do a lot of events. We have a lot of individuals walking the street. So we're working on trying to improve recycling from our visitors. When it comes back to our residents, each resident's given a recycle can. We pick up every Wednesday. We're doing the best. We educate our water bill stuff. We send out what should be recycled, what can't be recycled. Now I got to reevaluate because I'm not sure what this number 6 cup comes into play. We do have an very active environmental committee. We also hired, when I became mayor, a community conservation department head to oversee our programs, to work directly with the environmental committee to make sure we're doing what we can. Because we're right in the bay, we understand that we need to be a little bit more vigilant than maybe some other, and we're taking the steps that we can to improve that. We do compost all of the leaves that our Department of Public Works picks up around all of our streets and town-owned properties. This year, we're going to incorporate the residents be able to provide the leaves to us. We have a couple businesses that actually go to the site, pick up so they can plant and so forth, and then resell the plants, the vegetables to our community. We do a shredding day. So we're doing, and I learned a lot, and I am going to go back jokingly with Salisbury, Jake Day, I want to make sure, but I'm going to look into Recycle Right because I still think we have a challenge there. So I appreciate us being on here today. I'll learn from Julie Paluda, who's in Calvert County, that I'll be seeing today about one and so forth. So, we're doing what we can do. We want to continue to learn. And last thing I will say is that it's very confusing sometimes. Depends on when you go online or you Google or you speak to somebody, what can be recycled, what can't be recycled, the best way to recycle, the best financial way to do it. So I'm interested in see what comes out of this after all your meetings and so forth, of how to better educate us as a municipality on improving our recycling. So I'll end with that. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much. It was great to hear from all of our so many local governments, since you are in the trenches doing this work. And I know there were some follow-up questions, so we look forward to continuing the dialogue. And if you have written information that you'd like to share with us, please do. Now we're going to move on to getting a perspective from the industry that's doing this work. We're going to hear, I'm going to name who we're going to hear from in their order, so they're prepared. If you could all take 4 to 5 minutes to speak, so we can leave time for asking questions, that would be great. We're going to start with Phil Brezzi, I think you pronounce it, sorry, a member of the Maryland Recycling Network Board of Directors and a senior consultant with MSW Consultants. Then Barbara Gear, the general manager at Olive Street Processing, Jeff Edwards, the president of Evergreen Disposal, and Scott DeFife, who's the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. We also have Chaz Miller here, who is available for questions. So thank you for being here as well. Phil, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Delegate. Thanks, everybody, for being part of this panel. I'm glad to be here. My name is Phil Brzee, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Maryland Recycling Network, or MRN. And we're an organization whose membership includes recycling coordinators from all the counties and cities, or many of the cities in the state, also recyclables processors, collectors, end users, nonprofits, environmentalists, and concerned citizens. And we were founded in 1990, and we work to promote sustainable materials management, including the 3 R's of reduction, reuse, and recycling through educational programs, technical assistance, and advocacy. And it's on that last point in which we have communicated with the House ENT Committee in the recent past, providing comments and levels of support on a number of bills from the 2020 session, including House Bill 1452, which concerns recycling market development. So I do know that there's a lot of overlap among the panelists today, so I'm just going to focus on a few key areas. But first, I do want to acknowledge that these have been challenging and transformative times for recycling across the U.S., including here in Maryland. All programs have been impacted by the recovered materials import restrictions imposed by the Republic of China in early 2018. And these restrictions have had a profound impact on materials demand and have driven recyclables into a deep pricing slump that continues to this day. At the same time, the composition and the makeup of the solid waste stream continues to evolve, with less paper due to the influence of digital media, more cardboard due to online purchasing, more plastics resulting from packaging redesign and lightweighting, and of course, food waste now represents the largest fraction of the solid waste stream in many jurisdictions. So these changes present numerous challenges for recycling and have implications for processing and end markets infrastructure, citizen awareness, and public policy. So accordingly, I'd like to use time today just to talk about those critical issues. Number one is recycling market development and infrastructure. So as China's national sword made clear, we have neglected our domestic recovered materials end use infrastructure for far too long. So there are encouraging signs in our region with recovered paper mills poised to come online in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and new glass and plastics plants in Pennsylvania. However, we need to do our part to attract secondary processors and end users to Maryland to ensure continued capacity for our recyclables and to unlock the very important job creation benefits that recycling offers. And market development is especially important if local governments are expected to achieve high diversion or zero waste goals. So markets for a lot of the materials that are collected in Maryland programs were never really robust to begin with. And the 3 through 7 plastics category is certainly a case in point. So many of those markets have since vanished since China's national sword. Processing technology. The typical recycling facility, or MRF, in operation today was designed to process and sort a vintage recyclable stream, not really today's recycling stream. And so as the waste and recycling streams evolve, it will be important for MRFs to continue to innovate and upgrade with new technologies. Indeed, advances in artificial intelligence, robotic sorting, and optical sorting systems are already showing positive results in many facilities, including here in Maryland. Also want to talk about education and behavior change. So ensuring that people recycle correctly is especially important given today's demands for even cleaner recyclables. But even the most savvy and best intentioned recyclers can be confused by the changing material stream, misleading labels on packaging, and program differences from one state or county to the next. So resources are needed to design and implement outreach programs that inform on what is recyclable, how those materials should be prepared, and even provide feedback on recyclers. And while we've done a pretty good job at creating a recycling culture in single-family homes, there still is a lot of work to do in apartments, condominiums, and even in businesses. Finally, I want to talk about realistic policy goals. When setting goals, we believe that policymakers should consider a range of metrics to measure results, but with appreciation for the realities of recycling market access, infrastructure, and citizen behavior. The recycling rate goal that serves as the key metric in Maryland and most other states is outmoded and ignores the environmental impacts of recycling and other waste management approaches. And it also fails to tell the full story of how effective a jurisdiction's recycling and waste reduction program is. So during the past 10 years, many cities and counties around the US have adopted zero waste goals. While MRN does not have positions on the definition of zero waste and whether those goals should be considered only aspirational or what should count towards zero waste, the reality is that no city or county has come close to achieving it. And so I also think that it's safe to say that the challenges that have been brought about by China's national sort of only serve to underscore how challenging achieving zero waste is. So again, MRN, we appreciate the opportunity to provide input to this work group. We hope that today represents the start of a series of conversations about how to address the challenges surrounding recycling in Maryland. That wraps up my testimony. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Turn it over to Barbara.
Is that me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. My name is Barbara Gear. I've been in the recycling business in Maryland for over 30 years. Most of my experience has been in the commercial sector. But over the last 2 years, I've managed Olive Street Processing, which we operate in Murph and Capitol Heights, Maryland. Here at Olive Street, we accept both commercial and residential recycling materials. There have been significant changes on how we collect and sort recycling over the years, as everybody knows. But I found that in the commercial sector, it's easier to keep the recycling products clean, because if they're not, then the company will not receive a rebate. There could be subject to a trash fee for contamination and that sort of thing, which doesn't happen with residents. In the residential arena, which, like I said, I'm new to in the last 2 years, there is a problem with what we call wish cycling, which I'm sure you've all heard, which is the act of putting non-recyclable items in the recycling bin with the hope that it's going to be recycled. Unfortunately, it's a common mistake. And as much as we'd like to recycle everything into useful end products, the reality is many materials aren't recyclable, as has been discussed here already. Putting items in the recycling bin with the hope that they'll be recycled runs a risk of contamination. So basically, our motto is when in doubt, throw it out. Wish cycling might start with the best intentions, but people think they're cutting back on their waste stream, but sadly the opposite happens, and it creates way more contamination and more waste, and it does a lot of harm. I want to say that in that case, the best case scenario is the recycling facility can sort out the materials and landfill what's trash, but it still costs time and money. The worst case scenario is the equivalent of, which I read an analogy in an article, is throwing a red marker into a load of white laundry, where you're contaminating all of that material. So when somebody throws food garbage or something like that into the recycle, the material stream, that renders the entire batch useless. And then I've got to trash it, unfortunately, or landfill it. It can also damage equipment, plastic bags, garden hoses, dumbbells get tangled up in sorting screens, conveyor belts, things like that, and cause expensive shutdowns and repairs, unfortunately. I see all kinds of things come through my facility here. Propane tanks, bowling balls, syringes, broken blenders, mixers, clothes, tennis shoes, solo cups, styrofoam, all kinds of things. So there's still a lot of recycling confusion, and that's, I think, an education is key. And I know we're all trying to do that to try to control the contamination. I think what's happening now is so many people are home and they're just, oh, let's recycle it. But I think, I believe that the city and the countywide level education would help and that sort of thing. The other thing that we do with at least our hauling portion of my company does is we don't pick up the recycling bin and we leave a tag if it's got something that's a contaminant in it. Let them know, like just tag it out and say, this is why. There's usually just, you can check off plastic bags or garden hose or something like that. And it'll help the customer understand what's recyclable, what's not acceptable. And I've had this happen with my neighbors, and I've talked to my neighbors and I was like, you can't use plastic bags anymore. And they still do it because they were still being taken. But then they started getting tagged out and recycling wasn't picked up. So they learned. Even though I would tell them and I say, I recycle this every day, it comes to a place like mine, they still didn't understand until it didn't get picked up. I know that's hard to do, but in addition to that, I will say this, my parent company, WB Waste, we're upgrading our facility here in Capitol Heights with a $5.5 million investment in new technology with recycling equipment to automate how we're processing materials. This will also include an education component so we can offer tours for schools, municipalities on how the recycling process works at the MRF level. What we see the raw product coming in. I think we're the first private-owned company in the DC area to invest in private machinery, as far as I know. But my group has over 100 years of experience in recycling. We're happy and welcome to entertain any site visits. And I guess in conclusion, one of my questions was, are there any grants from the state of Maryland to help an organization like ours when we're upgrading to a new facility to add all this automated technology that's going to be the latest thing out there? So I wasn't sure about that. I do agree with the market analysis. The markets have been tricky with China. There's no doubt about that. 3 through 7's plastics is tricky. There are a lot of things that are hard to recycle. I've still found homes for everything, but at a reduced rate. So it does become challenging. But
did you just say 3 to 7 plastics? You mean that?
Yeah, 3 through 7's plastics.
Number 3, number 4, number 5. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, now 5 is recyclable. So to be quite honest, I found a grant through the Recycling Coalition that they will give me a grant if when I get this new equipment that I pull out 5. So I said, okay. So I'm looking at that. And I said, well, I still have to get rid of 3, 4, 6, and 7. He said, well, most of the places that take 3 through 7 only want the 5. And I'm like, well, so if I pull out the 5, what does that do with the rest of it? And as I forgot the other gentleman's name that was talking about the 6 cup, it's the same. You're going to run into something that you can't recycle, or you find a market for, as it were.
Right.
It does become challenging.
That was very interesting. Thank you. As to your question on state grants, I think that's something that we are all, I don't know that we have anything off the top of my head, but I think it's a great question. And it's why we're here today, to try to understand the role that the state can and should be playing in helping to drive forward waste reduction. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Turn it over to Jeff.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff Edwards, President of Evergreen Disposal. We offer residential trash removal, Southern Maryland, Charles, St. Mary's, Calvert counties. We are a little different than some other municipalities down there. It is a free enterprise market. So that means the consumers or the homeowners association can pick their trash provider. Charles County has their own recycling program. Calvert County, St. Mary's County offer it at their drop-off facilities. But we've taken it a step further. We actually offer recycling to the individual homeowners as an add-on service. And we've been trying to grow it for 3 to 5 years now. But out of 15,000 plus customers that we service in St. Mary's and Calvert County, we have 1,500 that have signed up to pay for a service that costs less than $10 a month. And it's not for a lack of trying. I have probably knocked on most doors in the county at least 3 or 4 times. We send phone blasts out to our residents, letting them know about our recycling program. It's in every single one of our bills. We've done individual mailers on it. So you look at my customer base, and we have less than 10% who want to pay to get recycling. On top of it, it's not a cheap service in the more outlying areas that we're in. If you look at, southern tip of Calvert County, near the Appeal landfill, it's 45 miles to the closest facility that will take single stream recycling from a hauler like myself. If you go into St. Mary's County and start stretching out in there, it can be 74, 75 miles to bring a load there. And I keep hearing kind of talk here of well, let's change our stream. Let's look at doing different ways. Recycling started that way. We were able to take trucks off the road when dual stream came, and then single stream came from the original method. So picture that I'm 75 miles away from the closest landfill, and my truck fills up with cardboard because of COVID. I got the rest of the stuff that's only half full, but I still got to drive 75 miles, dump my recyclables, and 75 miles back to start my route. So, we have to look for more than the bigger picture of what's the most effective way recycling is, what's the most effective way, fossil fuel wise, to pick it up. Because they don't, these aren't hybrid trash trucks. And we are kind of the front line. I call us the trash fairies, right? You put your trash out when you go to work, magically it's gone when you come home, and nobody knows everything that's involved in it. We're already dealing with a shortage of labor. As of last year, it was over 100,000 people nationwide, shortage of CDL drivers. The increase of shopping at home has definitely added to that equation. And we base everything, all of our prices and all of that's based on, volume. So in a tighter area, maybe Baltimore, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, I can go pick up 1,000 to 2,000 homes a day. A more rural area, I might get 400 homes a day. And then you start to look at, I've been very involved with the Maryland Solid Waste Association. It's a chapter of the National Waste and Recycling Association. And the legislative committee, we've had things have come out in the last year of, hey, getting, volume per household. We'd have to put a scale on and have to weigh the trash in every household to give you a true count of what you're getting, can versus bottle versus all that adds time. 1,000 customers we're going to go by a pickup, can become 100 or 200 when we start doing stuff like that. So, from a cost method, you got to figure out a way to keep it moving effectively, and dealing with that. Contamination and loads, we see it all the time. Probably the number one by volume for us is plastic bags. But that creates a whole nother problem. I have gone from the bin in my neighborhood to the wheeled and covered trash can. The bin, you put your material in it. It seemed like every day we put our bin out, it was a windy day. And we were running around our neighborhood, chasing all of our neighbors' trash. The wheeled and covered, has helped out. and help prevented that. The other big volume you get is, trash that's just not recyclable, as the other colleagues have talked about here. And in our counties here, we also get loads that can cross county lines. So to track it on a county level after we dump becomes another challenge that the haulers are faced with. Now, I've always been a big proponent of free enterprise markets. Free enterprise markets create us as the businesses trying to educate our consumers constantly, because it affects how much money we make as a consumer, as a business. So, the current challenge we have is a lack of facilities for us to bring materials to. And then for the facility side, the lack of facilities for them to take their materials to. And we all know there's a threshold of what, how many tonnage you need to bring in to make sense. There's many counties in the state that just can't get their own tonnage up to, to even build their own facility. So, now we got to start looking at maybe transfer options. So dump at one facility, put it, more tons on a bigger truck to drive further to get it to an end game recycler. So when we're looking at these challenges, pushing it all back onto the haulers creates a whole nother set of challenges. Thanks.
If I could interject.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Quickly, I apologize.
Sure.
So having said that, my company, WB Waste, we are opening up a facility in Hughesville. Hopefully, I think our start date will be November 1st to drop off recyclables in like Hughesville, Maryland. So I think that would help Jeff as far as down in that area, Charles, St. Mary's County, that sort of thing. So our goal is to open this facility up, and then we'll transload that material and bring it up to Olive Street, where I would process it here in Capitol Heights. But I think that would be helpful. I just wanted to let him know that. That's all.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you two can talk offline. Now I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you very much, Delegate Learman and Chairman Barve and other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I really appreciate the chance to come back since I testified in February in person in front of the committee in support of Delegate Love's bill, the bottle bill study proposal that was up there. And I can update you with some real life examples of what's been going on for the industry during COVID, because all of our testimony in February was pre-COVID, and we've learned some lessons, and we have some data and some practical impressions about what has been happening to supply chains. Let me start by reminding everybody glass is completely recyclable, infinitely recyclable, sustainable material, and the average bottle today that is produced by US manufacturers is already 1/3 recycled content. And the more recycled glass that we put into making new glass bottles and jars is a reduction in carbon emissions and energy use. And so it is a sustainable material that, from a circular economy perspective, we want more recycled cullet. And when we talk about cullet, we talk about the glass that is, Chairman Barve, we talk about the glass that has already been processed and is cleaned and is furnace ready. Okay, so the difference between the glass that goes in your bin and the glass that goes into the furnace is a processing, secondary processing that results in what we call cullet. It's really still pieces of broken glass, but it's furnace ready and meets spec. I'm going to put up a map here, if I can share my screen, that will help talk about markets and end markets. So hopefully you can see my Mid-Atlantic map now. And as you take a look at that, I'm going to speak to a couple of questions and issues that came up. Since February, we really do want to applaud Baltimore County for taking the step to create that initiative to clean up the glass that is in Baltimore County. And it is 2 of our members are participating in that process. One is doing some of the work to help clean it up, and the material is now going to end up in a bottle plant in eastern Pennsylvania. As you can see from my map, just to give you a little bit of perspective, these tighter circles are 100-mile radiuses, and mostly they emanate from bottle plants. My triangles and my squares are bottle plants. There's one down in Toano, Virginia, Danville, southern New Jersey, and then 2 in eastern Pennsylvania. The bigger circle, though, I want to make sure that I talk to you about is the 200-mile circle, and that is some processing. My circles, my smaller circles here, are glass processing facilities. Now, this is a tiny little glass crusher in Fairfax County, and this one in eastern, the panhandle of West Virginia, I think is really just a windshield flat glass facility and not a bottle glass facility, and those are different kinds of glass, and we can talk about that. But you will notice that there is a lack of processing facilities in Maryland. That doesn't mean that glass can't be done well in Maryland, because you are within reach of the markets, and as the initiative from Baltimore shows, and I believe Montgomery County's dual stream glass does end up at bottle plants in eastern Pennsylvania, there's a possibility of getting Maryland glass to end markets. There's also fiberglass plants, not so many in the mid-Atlantic, some over here in Ohio and in the South. But I'll just leave that map up there and we can talk to some of it. You know, I want to echo the point earlier made that a lot of investment is necessary. I can tell the members of the committee with regard to China and the pricing, glass was never exported to China for recycling. Glass is recycled here at home. However, it's collateral damage in terms of the effect of the pricing for the other materials, and the effect on pricing for the other materials has impacted the ability for recyclers and waste management companies to process glass and invest in the equipment that needs to be invested in at the single stream MRFs. And I would also agree that largely, while single stream can work, it largely hasn't. And it is mostly because the residual contamination, the output and quality. In February, I talked about quality. I'm going to talk about quality again. Quality is the biggest impact on price. Secondarily is going to be transportation costs. So I do want to recommend the dual stream over single stream when the MRF processing equipment is not properly handling all of your materials, okay? And also to echo some of the other points on regional, there is a huge need to understand the market economics and the market power of single cities and counties, especially those with smaller populations and more rural, distant, lessly dense populated areas like Southern Maryland or the Eastern Shore. Regional aggregation depots, hub and spoke area facilities that would allow the counties to find a central place to bring their material and cut down their transportation costs will dramatically increase the value of the recyclable commodities that they're delivering out of the stream in the first place. In this map, in the very tippy top there, you can see a couple red blotches. Those are our bottle bill states. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the quality difference and the value. Chairman Barbe asked about some quality differences and price differences between single and dual stream. A little bit of processing can go a long way. And the difference between a clean source separated glass and what we would call a dirty MRF glass or MRF glass that is highly contaminated in the 50 to 60% is still highly contaminated glass. You can almost double or triple the value of the glass coming out of the stream, the cleaner it is. Markets have fluctuated. I did note the paper from Montgomery County, I believe it was Montgomery County, put up a paper from the first quarter that showed some different pricing of the variable commodities in the mid-Atlantic region. I just checked before we went online. Clear flint glass, we call clear glass flint in the industry, is up to around $50 or $60 a ton if it's source separated and clean. Dirty MRF glass is a -$30, -$40 a ton. So there's an $80 swing at least from negative to positive in the value of the material coming out of the stream, depending upon the quality of the material. But due to COVID, one of the things that we learned was that a system that relies on a lot of back to retail situations was highly was impacted by COVID, as governors largely relaxed enforcement of redemption requirements, because when you have a bottle bill, there's usually a requirement to redeem for the retailers and things of that nature. And so you want to have a mix of redemption centers and return to retail. And redemption centers can function as aggregation points as well, especially in more rural areas where you can bring materials back to a central place that is built to take material back, instead of retailers often object because they like to sell things, put it out the door rather than take things back. And some of the distribution channels, beer wholesalers, beverage companies are in the business of delivering and not necessarily taking back. These are problems that can be solved. In February, I talked about the Oregon bottle bill model. If you want to explore that, we highly recommend that. It's a mix of retail and redemption center, and everybody's in kind of in a holistic co-op where people benefit, and all of the proceeds are returned to the system to invest in more infrastructure to increase the system and to keep the system sustainable. So absolutely, hub and spoke, regional centers, and the dual stream, provides a really clean stream.
Thank you. This is really interesting. Okay, we had a couple questions. First was, well, maybe only just a couple. Chairman Barve, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Brooke. I think that Scott answered substantially my question, and it was the difference between dual and single stream recycling. I think, Scott, you put your finger right on it when you said upfront a little bit of sorting makes a big difference, I assume, in the financials of in the economics of it. So basically dual stream is a higher quality of input for you, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We support that. I mean, that is kind of a back to the future, suggestion, the way it was before people moved to single stream. And we certainly understand why people move to single stream, economies of scale and things of that nature. But single stream's only as good as the facility that the material is going to. And the output from there really depends on the quality as to whether it's marketable.
So it's very sort of, to paraphrase an expression in the IT industry, garbage in, garbage out.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Did I miss anybody?
Can I respond to Chairman Barve's question as well?
Course. Yep.
So I think my response would be that it really depends on the program and how effective the outreach and education is. What the program materials are. Even dual stream programs have to invest a lot of resources and energy into cleaning up the container stream, for example. I do think it's safe to say that generally speaking, single stream programs do have a little bit higher of a contamination rate, as well as they do bring more challenges as far as delivering a cleaner stream out the back door of the MRF, meaning less residue. But again, I think that, both streams and even source separated streams, the way we used to do things back 30 years ago, all of those types of programs need to have systems on the back end that help remove contaminants and strong outreach and education programs.
If I can just follow up, I mean, obviously for a large jurisdiction and wealthy jurisdiction like Montgomery County, dual stream is the preferred way to go. But I'm very aware of the fact that smaller jurisdictions are going to have cost challenges with respect to educating and implementing. And I think that as a state in the future, when we have money, we should consider the possibility of helping smaller jurisdictions, because not everybody has the scale that Montgomery or Baltimore County or Prince George's County have. So that's not a question, that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's true. And none of you addressed composting too much, but we will be talking more about composting facilities and that industry in our second day. But while you're all here, would any of you care to comment on your involvement in or your experience with composting programs?
I have a comment, but I'll let the others speak first if they want.
So I think in my line of business, I think it's what we find when we do waste characterization studies for cities and counties and states all around the country, that the largest single component of one's waste stream now is more often now becoming it's food scraps. So I think that there are tremendous opportunities for cities, counties, and states to implement programs that recover food waste. I think in Maryland, Maryland's done a pretty good job at identifying opportunities, but also certainly Maryland's done a good job at recovering yard wastes. But I definitely think that food scraps and recovering those materials are the next frontier, and that's really where you're going to need to focus to drive your recycling rates higher.
Thank you.
I would agree, based on my experience, not just at Glass, but prior to Glass in the restaurant industry and the plastics industry. And actually, when I worked on Capitol Hill and worked for Leader Hoyer, we wrote a bill on energy recovery for Maryland that included anaerobic digestion facilities, because you can marry the agricultural parts of Maryland's economy with the recycling parts of Maryland's economy. Now for glass and for packaging, food packaging in general, there are, one of the things that I've learned in the past year, there's an incredible amount actually of what we would call decanting or depackaging operations, because there's food, there's food waste that comes out of, prepared food, but there's also expired or, some other issues with that. And there are operations in the Northeast that will take the material out of the package, create the organic material for the anaerobic digestion, and then get the packages over to the package recyclers as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And the biggest challenge from a hauler perspective is having the infrastructure to take that somewhere. You got to have the facilities that make sense to get that, and that's what we really need to push is the infrastructure from the top down of in-game facilities, to ability to bring those food waste and and at what cost to certain consumers. We can't just put a broad brush on it. Somebody on the far end of the Eastern Shore trying to bring up a crab house and food waste from there is going to have a much bigger cost than maybe somebody in Bethesda.
Right. That's right. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for helping us stay so on time and ahead of time. So that was a great panel. We are going to turn now to our last panel of the day, which is about single-use plastics. We have titled this Single-Use Plastics 101, although many folks on the committee have learned about single-use plastics over the last few years from various bills that have been filed. So we are going to go, here's the order we're going to go in. And I will try to hold up sort of a one when you have 1 minute left. So we're going to start with Christine Kanaus, who's a PhD candidate from UMCs at the Horn Point Laboratory. Move over to Dr. Helen Bailey, a research associate professor at UMCs. Then we'll hear from Kate Bryman, the State Director of Environment Maryland. Then Christy Levitt, the Plastics Campaign Manager at Oceana. Altine Karas, I'm going to mispronounce your name. I'm sorry, Altine. Karasapan, the Environmental Health Coordinator at the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, which I like to call NICL. Dr. Sakabi Wilson, who's an Associate Professor and Director of Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health at the School of Public Health at the University of Maryland, College Park. And Stephen Feit, a Senior Attorney at the Center for International Environmental Law. So delighted to have all of you here today. You have a wealth of information and experience with plastics, and I'm looking forward to the panel. So we will start with Christine. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hello, my name is Christine Kanaus, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. I'd like to thank the chair and the vice chair of this committee and its members for giving me this opportunity to offer testimony today on this really important topic. Generally speaking, microplastics are particles that are between 5 millimeters, or the size of a pencil eraser, down to 100 nanometers, or 1/100th of the diameter of a human hair. Microplastics that pose the greatest risks to the Chesapeake Bay come from the breakup of larger plastics, primarily single-use plastics. Larger plastics begin to break up and produce microplastics in as little as 8 weeks in a coastal ecosystem. Microplastics are ingested by a variety of aquatic organisms, from microscopic to the largest aquatic animals. They are in all parts of the aquatic food chain and are typically mistaken for food. The bottom left image depicts small and microscopic organisms in a group that we call zooplankton, and the glowing green particles within the organisms are microplastics that they have ingested. Microplastics affect individual animals in a variety of ways, such as changing food ingestion rates, reducing growth, and in some cases causing mortality. In my PhD research on oyster larvae, microplastic ingestion altered oyster larval body functions, such as feeding and respiration. Microplastics not only affect the individual animals, but can also have effects at the population and ecosystem levels. Microplastic effects on reproduction and larval development and health can affect populations. For example, adult oysters exposed to microplastics showed reduced reproduction, and their unexposed offspring had developmental delays and were more prone to predation. Also, decreases in populations of zooplankton can ripple up the food chain because they are prey for larger organisms. Microplastics can alter the behavior or ecosystem functions of organisms, like oysters filtering and cleaning the water. This, paired with population level changes, impact the ecosystem. There are 3 areas of microplastic impacts that are of particular interest for the Chesapeake Bay. First, microplastics affect environmentally and economically important bay species, such as oysters, blue crabs, and black sea bass. Second, microplastics concentrate in submerged aquatic vegetation, SAV, which is an important habitat and food source for many organisms in the bay, exposing juveniles and vulnerable organisms to more microplastics. Also, small organisms which grow on the blades of seagrasses glue microplastics to the blades and provide an additional potential pathway for microplastics to enter the food chain. You can see this in the top right image. Finally, plastics harbor naturally occurring but harmful bacteria like Vibrio, creating another potential mechanism to infect oysters. Some Vibrio species are harmful to oysters, and the bacteria can pass to humans and infect them if a contaminated raw oyster is eaten. In summary, microplastics are ubiquitous and abundant. They show a variety of effects at the organismal, population, and ecosystem levels, and they present significant risks to the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me, how do I stop?
Just have to hit stop sharing. Yep, great. Thank you. Dr. Bailey?
Hello, I'll share my screen here. Can you see the slide?
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you. My name is Helen Bailey, and I'm a research associate professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. I would like to thank the chair of this work group and its members for giving me this opportunity to offer testimony today on this important topic. So my scientific research is primarily focused on tracking some of the largest inhabitants in Maryland waters, whales, dolphins, and sea turtles. We are seeing an increasing number of these large animals being harmed or even killed as they become entangled in plastic or they eat plastic that they mistake for food. How can we prevent so much plastic from getting into our environment? Popular solutions use the slogan reduce, reuse, recycle, and there has been particular emphasis on recycling. But there are severe limitations with recycling plastics. And today I would like to highlight this in 3 main points. Only a few types of plastic can actually be recycled. Of those plastics, they can only be recycled a limited number of times, and plastics are often contaminated with other materials and types of plastics that cannot be recycled. So firstly, not all plastics can be recycled. There are 2 main types of plastics, thermoset and thermoplastics. Only thermoplastics, which can be melted and remolded, can be recycled. Thermoset plastics cannot. Furthermore, of the thermoplastics that can be recycled, there needs to be market demand for the recycled products. Plastics are marked with a resin code within a triangle of arrows. And this triangle has often been mistaken for meaning that that product can be recycled. But as we've heard, that is not always the case. Usually only number 1 and 2 plastics, which have the best recycling properties, are recycled, reprocessed, and resold. The higher the number, the higher that resin number, the harder it usually is to recycle that plastic. So the other types of plastic often have to be removed during sorting, which is costly, and then end up being disposed of elsewhere. So second, why can't plastic be recycled infinitely like glass and metal? So plastic consists of chains of molecules that break off and decrease in quality over time. This means that when it is recycled, it usually has to be mixed with new plastic or made into a lower quality plastic product. For example, a plastic water bottle might be recycled into a shopping bag. After a while, the plastic becomes such low quality that a new product can no longer be made from it. In this way, plastic recycling is not circular, but simply delays when plastic enters at the landfill or is incinerated. Third, it should be noted that items often consist of multiple plastic types. Plastic is not just one thing. Dyes and other additives are also frequently used in plastics. It is difficult or nearly impossible to remove and take out all those different types of materials from that plastic item. So the ability to form new products from mixed plastics would be a great advance to recycling, but contamination with other materials, chemicals, food would still be a major issue. So to conclude, plastics are widely used because of their versatility and durability, but that durability means that they also persist in the environment. Petroleum-based plastics are extremely difficult to break down. Instead, they break up into smaller pieces. And the image I'm showing here is actually from a sign that, working with Calvert County government, is now installed as an outdoor sign on the Solomon's Boardwalk in Calvert County. Only a few types of plastic can actually be recycled, and even few are recycled, and even then only a few times at best. If we go back to the slogan, reduce, reuse, recycle, I think it is time to recognize that recycle and reuse both delay the final disposal of plastic, but they do not prevent it. The remaining solution is to reduce our plastic use, particularly single-use plastics, so that there will be less of it filling up our landfills and entering our environment and ecosystems. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting and helpful. Oops. And now we're going to turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Delegate Lehrman, and thank you, Chairman Barve and members of the subcommittee for having me today. My name is Kate Bremen. I'm the State Director of Environment Maryland, a statewide citizen-based environmental advocacy group. So we'll call this Single-Use Plastics 201. I'll try to take it up a level from here. So every year, roughly 8 million tons of plastic waste pollutes our waterways, joining the masses that are already in the environment. As you just heard, it never breaks down, it breaks up. So outside of the plastic that we've incinerated, every single plastic item that we have ever used is still on this planet somewhere. As we've heard today, the recycling system is faltering across the United States. Last year, Environment Maryland Research and Policy Center released a study on our recycling rates. And so we took that 44% that you've heard and aggregated out plastic, and we found that in 2016, Maryland only recycled 13.7% of our plastic waste. Recycling depends on the idea that the cost of collecting and sorting certain materials is rational because somebody will want to buy them to make something else. And what we know is that in reality, plastics don't have that kind of market. So we need to come to terms with the fact, as we've heard, that a lot of things that we're told are recyclable are not actually recyclable in practice. We've talked a lot today about education and consumer responsibility when it comes to recycling and the consumption in general, but the reality is that the onus should not rest solely on consumers. We need policies that really restrict the overall production of plastic, and we need to put more responsibility on producers. Adam gave a great example of the number 6 cups, and you saw just in this call how many of us were like, oh my gosh, I need to check my cup. And that's a perfect example of how critical it is to change the way we're doing things at a high level so that we aren't stuck at the county, municipal, and consumer levels trying to mitigate a problem that is getting exponentially worse. So because of this, most US plastic waste is landfilled or incinerated, necessitating that new materials be extracted and manufactured. Those new materials to create more plastic are fracked gas and crude oil, which contribute to climate change. The plastic we burn also contributes to costly externalities. In a 2017 study, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation estimated that one trash incinerator in Baltimore City engendered almost $22 million of medical expenses in Maryland every year. But that's not the only hidden cost. I'm also going to share my screen to show you a picture of recycling infrastructure in Prince George's County. Okay, there it is. Y'all can see that, right? We're gonna guess you can. So this is a machine that is clean and ready to sort. This is a machine at the end of the day that is totally bound up in plastic bags. So looking at this machinery, we can see that I'm trying to make sure my screen's showing. This is costly, as we heard earlier from some of our recycling experts. This can lead to damage of the machinery, and it takes people to go in and untangle. Sorry, I wanted to stop my share. So what do we do? I'm not here to say that recycling doesn't work at all. For certain materials like cardboard and aluminum, certainly it works. And we should keep trying to make our system strong. But we also need to understand that our recycling system is failing us for plastic. So over the last 3 decades, the amount of plastic entering the system has increased to a point where we just can't manage it. In 1980, 20,000 tons of plastic was recycled. In 2015, that number went up to 3 million tons. That same year, 5 million tons of plastic was burned and another 26 million tons was landfilled. From an advocacy perspective, we are dealing with a more engaged public on this issue maybe than ever. Environment Maryland staff last summer knocked on 15,000 doors across the state and collected more than 5,000 petitions calling on Governor Hogan and the General Assembly to take action on plastic pollution. Bans are popping up across the country because people are really coming around to this issue and seeing that we are drowning in plastic. And that even as a consumer, it is all but impossible to go a week in the world without having to use something wrapped in plastic. The final thing, that I just want to really underscore here is that we're producing too much plastic. We don't have a good way to deal with it at this moment. And from methane emissions to toxic fumes from incinerators, our waste problem is quite literally threatening the future of our planet. So I'm going to share my screen one more time to share some solutions that we have. Our recommendation, of course, always starts with reduction in general. And
you have like 15 seconds, just FYI.
Okay, then I won't share it. I'll just put it in the chat. And I'll end with our tagline on this, which is that nothing we use for 5 minutes should threaten our planet for centuries. So thank you so much for having me.
Sure, and perhaps somebody will ask you what the ideas you want are, but I just want to make sure we get through the panel. So thank you. Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about single-use plastics. My name is Christy Levitt, and I'm the Plastics Campaign Director with Oceana. Oceana is the largest international advocacy organization dedicated solely to ocean conservation. And I'll talk briefly about the plastic pollution problem, but spend more time talking about what is being done to address the problem around the world and across the country. So as we've heard, plastic pollution is a growing threat to the environment. It's a growing threat to the world's ocean, as well as our food, health, and climate. Each year, an estimated 17.6 billion pounds of plastic enters the marine environment. That's roughly equivalent to a garbage truck full of plastic being dumped into the oceans every minute. And single-use plastics are profoundly flawed by design. Plastic bottles, plastic grocery bags, plastic utensils, and more are made from a material created to last forever, even though these products are designed to be thrown away after one use. And while we begin to realize the extent of plastic pollution's effects on the ocean, the petrochemical industry is investing significantly in the production of more plastic. Plastic production is projected to quadruple between 2014 and 2050. And as we've been talking about this morning, recycling is not enough to solve the plastic crisis. Only 9% of all the plastic waste ever produced has been recycled. So waste management solutions haven't adequately dealt with plastic pollution in the past and cannot realistically keep up with these rising rates of plastic production. But there is a clear solution, which is that we need to reduce the amount of plastic produced. And while the responsibility to reverse the plastic problem should primarily fall on the companies that produce plastics and plastic products, governments can play a critical role, especially when those companies are not motivated to act on their own. Policies such as bans, fees, taxes, deposit return systems, and extended producer responsibility have been shown to reduce plastic pollution. And while the United States has often been an international leader on environmental issues, we're falling behind other countries on addressing plastic pollution. In 2018, the European Union announced a phase out of single-use plastics by 2021. In 2019, Canada announced plans to develop a strategy to address and reduce priority single-use plastics by the end of 2021. And in 2018, Peru passed a law regulating single-use plastics, banning them from sensitive areas like beaches and national parks, taxing plastic bags, and limiting the manufacture and use of a broad swath of disposable plastics. And in the US, there is good news. The good news is that cities, towns, counties, and states are not waiting for federal level action and are instead leading the way in regulating single-use plastics. Around the country, more than 450 cities and counties and 8 states have passed bans or put fees on plastic bags. More than 200 cities and counties and 4 states, including Maryland, have passed bans on expanded polystyrene foam foodware. 10 states have beverage container deposit laws in place. And in addition to addressing these specific single-use plastics, governments are working on more comprehensive policies. So currently, the California State Legislature is considering a bill that will reduce waste generated by single-use plastic packaging and single-use plastic food serviceware by 70% by 2022. And they're looking to do this through source reduction, recycling, and composting. The city of Berkeley, California passed a comprehensive foodware ordinance in 2019 that will ultimately require food vendors to use only reusable foodware for on-site dining, with a few compostable exceptions. And on the federal level, the Congressional Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act provides a blueprint that states and cities can use to reduce plastic pollution and packaging waste. So states like Maryland should continue to lead the way in regulating the production and use of single-use plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Altine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Share my screen. And I think my presentation will build very directly onto Christy's and Kate's. So thank you both. And thank you all for inviting me here. So I'm going to give just a very brief overview of plastics policies in the states and some successes we've seen. I am the Environmental Health Coordinator with the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. For those that don't know, NCEL is a nationwide network of over 1,000 state legislators from across the country all working to advance environmental policies in their states. As staff, we really serve as a resource to legislators, providing them with resources, connecting to other legislators working on similar issues so folks don't have to reinvent the wheel, and providing spaces for shared learning. Along with this, one of our many roles is to track legislation. And over the course of the last 2 years, I've worked to track single-use plastics legislation and really captured the momentum that exists on single-use plastics at the state level. States are really leading the way on this. So in 2019, we saw over 260 bills introduced across the US. And in 2020, as you all can see, over 200 bills introduced and like under consideration across 34 states. Obviously, this COVID-19 obviously stopped a lot of legislative sessions. So this is all that happened just until March, which really shows you how many states are working on this issue. And this covers bills that range from a number of different kind of angles to tackle single-use plastics. And we've kind of worked to categorize some of the major trends we've seen. This is by no means an end-all be-all list, but just kind of to give you a sense of what the trends are. So obviously single-use item bans, Maryland's polystyrene ban spearheaded by Delegate Learman and Senator Kagan is a great example. And these bills are really just to get towards source reduction. We also have seen study commission bills to create task forces to study plastics in states. We've seen bills to encourage reusables, like New York's right to refill legislation. Bills, of course, to encourage recycling that give funding to recycling infrastructure, or bills to build out or create bottle deposit systems like Delegate Love's bill this past year. And then, of course, extended producer responsibility, which fits under recycling, and we can get more into that in just a few slides. So we do want to share some successes. It's not all hopeless, of course. So Maryland and Maine were among the 2 first states to ban expanded polystyrene. Delaware, Oregon, New York, Maine, and Washington banned single-use plastic carryout bags. Washington was the only one to pass in 2020, but really great progress on that front. Vermont actually comprehensively banned the quote-unquote trifecta of single-use items, so the most commonly used and thrown away items. So that's single-use bags, straws upon request, expanded polystyrene, and stirrers. And then Maine and Washington introduced bills to hold producers accountable for the waste they create, which these bills did not pass, but they did set a national precedent for kind of overhauling the waste management system, because as everyone has said, source reduction and recycling kind of go hand in hand. These bills, such as California's, really wanted to just set strict recycling standards and recyclability standards, and then Washington's bill puts full onus on producers to manage the waste that they create, really setting a strong standard of what waste management could look like. And then Maine's bill produces an interesting hybrid approach that taxes producers for the waste they create, plastic waste they create, and then those funds go towards existing recycling systems. So definitely some interesting ways to kind of both attack plastics at its source and at its end of life. I wanted to keep it brief, so that is all I have, but happy to answer more questions at the end, or you can email me as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So next, I think we're gonna, I'm gonna reverse course a little bit because I think the flow will make more sense. We're gonna have Stephen Feit from the Center for International Environmental Law, and then we're gonna end today's panel with Dr. Wilson from College Park. And then we're gonna open it up to questions for this whole panel, and we're doing great on time. So Stephen, take it away.
Honorable Chairman Barve, Delegate Learman, and members of the committee, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. My name is Stephen Feit. I'm a senior attorney at the Center for International Environmental Law. Since 1989, CL has used the power of the law to protect the environment, promote human rights, and ensure a just and sustainable society. I am here to discuss the harms caused by the entire plastic life cycle and some key responses to the ongoing plastic crisis. As we have already heard, plastic is fossil fuel in another form. Virtually all plastic is made from component chemicals in oil and gas. And after being extracted, those fossil fuels are separated, with some of the petrochemicals going to plastic production. Those petrochemicals are then heated to extremely high temperatures and pressures to crack them apart, and then recombined with other additives to form small pellets called nurdles, which are the basic building blocks of the products and packaging we recognize as plastic. Then, when the plastic is inevitably discarded, it is either recycled, landfilled, or incinerated, unless it is lost to the environment. Plastic pollution, therefore, does not start when trash makes its way into the ocean. Rather, it starts much earlier, at the wellhead where plastic begins its life. Two reports CL and partner organizations released last year outline the human health and climate impacts of the entire plastic life cycle. And in short, plastic presents significant toxic human health risks and releases greenhouse gases throughout its life cycle. Fracking and other forms of fossil fuel extraction release greenhouse gases from energy use, as well as through venting, flaring, and land clearance. The plastic manufacturing process is enormously energy intensive and therefore emissions intensive. And in fact, in the United States, chemical production is the greatest consumer of energy of all industrial sectors. And then finally, when plastic is burned, it is as bad or worse for the climate as fossil fuels because plastic is fossil fuel. So in our report, we calculated the full climate impact of the plastic life cycle. And if industry projections for plastic growth and plans for increasing incineration come to pass, plastic alone could emit 56 gigatons of carbon dioxide, equivalent gases, by 2050, eating up 10 to 13% of the remaining carbon budget. But in addition to significant global impacts from greenhouse gases, the plastic life cycle has significant local impacts as well. Toxic compounds released during the fracking and cracking processes, particulate matter emitted from incinerators, microplastics and endocrine disrupting chemicals migrating into human bodies through direct exposure, food chains, drinking water, and even the air. Plastic causes human health and environmental harms at every stage of its life cycle. And since we released our report on plastic and health last year, the evidence of the dangers of the plastic supply chain has continued to mount. Hardly a week goes by without another study about the pervasiveness of plastic and the potential hazards it may bring. Just this week, for example, scientists released a study that found microplastic in every single human tissue sample examined. So in light of the mounting risks plastic poses, we are seeing action on plastic at every level. So as you heard, not only are incredible efforts being made at the state and local level, but comprehensive legislation has been introduced at the federal level. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act seeks to stop plastic pollution at the source, including through a pause on new permitting for plastic production facilities, extended producer responsibility, minimum recycled content requirements, and much more. Then internationally, the global scale of this problem is increasingly being recognized. Two prominent examples include the Basel Convention, where countries agreed to label most categories of plastic waste as hazardous, and at the United Nations Environment Assembly, where discussions and consideration of an international treaty to combat plastic pollution continue. So in the end, plastic presents a profound threat to human health, the environment, and the climate. The only sure way to deal with this crisis is to turn off the tap and stop plastic production at the source. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that discussion. And if you could put links to the reports that you did in the chat, we can also circulate those to the members. There are some good executive summaries that I think people will find useful. So thank you. And now I'm delighted to turn it over to Dr. Wilson from the University of Maryland, College Park. So Dr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me all right?
Yep,
my name is Jacoby Wilson. I'm at the University of Maryland, College Park. What I want to do today is build off the previous panelists and talk more about how plastics impact certain communities more. So speak to the environmental justice issues and also a little bit about the public health issues. So when you think about, as the previous speaker just mentioned, the life cycle of plastics, you have to first start with extraction. So looking at fossil fuel extraction, whether it be natural gas, fracking, or whether it be traditional oil and gas extraction. And so what we see is across the country, These facilities disproportionately impact communities of color and low wealth communities. If you look at our petrochemical infrastructure in the US, such as the Houston Ship Channel, that Houston Ship Channel disproportionately, where it has a number of petrochemical operations, disproportionately impacts community of color, including Latinos, Latinx populations, and African Americans, and then also low wealth populations. And in the Houston Ship Channel, children who live within 2 miles of the Houston Ship Channel have a 56% greater chance of getting leukemia than children living elsewhere. And that was a study done by the University of Texas School of Public Health. In addition, if you look at this area of Louisiana known as Cancer Alley, this is the 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. There's a number of refineries and petrochemical plants that, again, they're producing plastics. And people who live in this area have 50 times as likely chance of getting cancer compared to the average American. And then, as you know right now, because of SARS-CoV-2 virus and COVID-19 disease, Louisiana is a hot spot. And in some of these communities that are disproportionately impacted by petrochemical operations, where they're refining fossil fuels, are also the ones that are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And you think about St. James Parish, which has one of the highest rates of morbidity of COVID-19, that's where you have this plant, Formosa plant, which is, again, it's going to disproportionately impact communities of color, particularly Black folks in that parish. Other work in other parts of the country have looked at plastic pollution as well. A study done by Marath found that communities living within 2.5 miles of refineries, including those associated with plastic pollution, disproportionately were non-white, and Black people were being exposed to 1.5 more times particulate matter than white people, Hispanics 1.2 times more. And also we see that the ethane cracker facilities, particularly in Pennsylvania, again, are disproportionately located in low wealth communities. So you think about these facilities and their emissions, why is particulate matter so important to talk about? Well, particulate matter is dust in the air. That dust can cause asthma attacks, it can cause stroke, it can cause heart disease, elevate your blood pressure. It can lead to more cancer. It can increase infant mortality, birth defects. It also can contribute to Alzheimer's and other neurological deficits. In addition, it can decrease your life expectancy. And also the problem with particulate matter is when you are burning plastics, things could absorb to the PM. So polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, dioxins are produced. So those things can impact and target different organ systems. And of course, particulate matter can be moved through your circulatory system and take along with it metals and other items that have been burned and then move into different organ systems like the brain, which is really important when we think about the health of children. Another study done by Johnston et al. Found that proportion of people of color living less than 5 kilometers from a disposal well was 1.3 times higher than the proportion of non-Hispanic whites. And so these wastewater disposal wells in Southern Texas are disproportionately permitted in areas, again, where more people of color. Let's go to Baltimore, for example. We know there's been a lot of discussions about incineration in Baltimore. One of the incinerators in Baltimore produces 64% of the nitrogen oxide pollution emitted from smokestacks in the city in 2014. Again, just like particulate matter, nitrogen oxides can impact respiratory health, so it can cause asthma. So Baltimore's asthma rate is almost 50% higher than the national average in adults and more than double the national average among children. So when you think about these facilities, it's the extraction, it's the processing, and it's the waste. So when you think about plastics, it was just said, fossil fuels impact communities of color disproportionately. And also within those communities, think about the impacts on susceptible populations like children and like the elderly. When we get to incinerators, 79% of the 73 incinerators in the US are located in primarily Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities. NAACP did a study called Fumes Across the Fence Line, and again, showing time and time again that extractive facilities, processing facilities, disproportionately impact communities of color. So I just want to keep hitting that point that plastics don't impact all of us the same. It impacts us differentially. And so if you think about the life cycle of plastics, you think about the health effects of plastics, we have to really take those things into account. And then what are some solutions? But many of the panelists already talked about solutions. I'll stop here, but zero waste initiatives are important, and really making sure that we engage those frontline communities who are impacted by these facilities, engage them and understand the life cycle of plastics and then have them be a part of solution of discussion as well. So it's important for frontline, fence-line communities to be part of decision-making, but what we do about plastics and how do we move away from fossil fuels and how do we move away from plastics? So thank you.
Thank you. That was a great and important note to end on with today's panel. So we had a few questions. We'll start with Chairman Barve.
Thank you. Obviously we can't go to zero waste on plastics because of the medical uses of plastics that really can't be practically replaced. And I think we can all agree that incineration is a non-optimal solution, especially with respect to plastic. So that leaves us with landfilling. So I suppose this question goes to somebody at UMCES or some scientist who's still on here. What are the environmental impacts of landfilling plastic vis-a-vis incineration, and again, I want to underscore, given the fact that it's ridiculously difficult to recycle plastic, we're going to have to do something with that because we're not going to be able to practically go to zero use with respect to plastic. So what is the best way? What about landfilling? What are the best ways to handle this substance to minimize impacts upon the environment?
Anyone can answer.
I'm happy to turn it over to anyone from UMCES, but I can say as far as landfills go, and I do want to, I really appreciate your point, Chairman Barve, that for us, when we talk about the plastics we want to get rid of, it's the ones we don't need. It's the ones that aren't necessary. And when we look at the sheer amount of plastics entering the waste stream, it's not these really kind of critical things that are we're not going to refute that. It's the fact that we're using it for a bag or packaging that is intended to be used for 5 minutes, and it's a material that never goes away. So from a design perspective, it just doesn't make sense. But to your question of landfilling, some of the data that we have, so 20% of all human-caused methane has come from landfills. In addition, landfills can leak fluid that contains a wide variety of carcinogenic chemical contaminants into groundwater. And then again, I'd love to hear someone from UMCES address this more, but when plastic ends up there, my understanding is that it will never break down, as Dr. Bailey said, but that it ends up contaminating kind of all of the other things going on. And then the methane emissions are a huge concern.
Well, the methane emissions are due to the breakdown of organic matter, not plastics. I mean, I don't think, I think the hamburger you throw in the garbage that goes into the landfill is what turns into methanes, not the methane, not the plastic it's wrapped in. But I'd love to hear more about that.
Dr. Bailey, do you want to respond?
Hi, I mean, I don't have an exact number, and I can certainly look into that more in terms of the environmental impact in the landfill. But I would challenge to some extent, you said it has to be used for medical. I think we have the ability to innovate. I mean, just as we created plastics, you say, are made right now, we're usually talking about petroleum-based. So it's from an organic material that we have made synthetic. And we have made all these different plastic types. And we talked about the plastic numbers as 1 to 7, but bear in mind 7 is everything else. So it actually consists of hundreds of plastic types, and those continue to be added to. So I see no reason, just as we created plastic, that we could not innovate to create a more biodegradable material in the future. And I would say investment in that would be really important. So I challenge the initial premise that we have to use it, because I think we certainly have the ability to come up with alternatives. But in terms, we know in the landfill, as I say, just as it's hard, the most likely place that plastic breaks down is when there's light and there's physical action. And most like that, a beach is a prime example, and why beach cleanups are so important, because light does help it break up into smaller pieces, but it's still not going away. It's just going into those smaller pieces. It's not breaking it down molecularly. So I think we just need to keep in mind that what we're putting in the landfill is staying there. And how do we feel about that? And how is it contained?
Well, I'll just say that I'm noticing from the chat room a number of people who have, at least in this chat, commented that plant-based plastics aren't that much better than petroleum-based plastics. I don't know if that's true or not. Something that we're going to have to investigate. I don't know. It's a difficult problem, and I just want to say that most people are not trying to become vegans, as my wife and I are trying to become, and they will buy ground beef and it will be wrapped in plastic. It's not going to be most likely wrapped in anything else. So anyway, that's the end of it of my comment, Delegate Lehrman.
Thank you. Unless you go to Whole Foods, they don't wrap it in plastic there. They give it to you in paper. So Vice Chair Stein had a question.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm really interested in learning more about the public health impact of plastic production and microplastics. So Dr. Wilson, you mentioned how there was research showing that the particulate matter, I think you said, that's generated from plastic production, has a clear connection with respiratory ailments. So if you could forward that research to us, so take a look at it. And then Christine, also in your research about the impact of ingestion of microplastics in fish and wildlife, in terms of its impact on public health, I think you mentioned there's one study that says that there's a connection between microplastics and Vibrio and raw oysters. But I want to ask is, do you have any other research on the impact on human health of this ingestion by different organisms, many of which we end up eating, that impact on public health?
Sure. So yes, I did mention, so plastics can harbor harmful bacteria, such as Vibrio, that can infect humans. And we are really at the beginning stages in terms of looking at the effects of plastic. But we can relate, there are a lot of microplastics in the air, and we can kind of relate some of that research to asbestos and other fibrous particles. So that is beginning. And as one of the other panelists mentioned, just on Monday, a study was announced that showed microplastics in different human organs, such as the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. So we're really at the beginning, just learning that we do have microplastics and some of the other associated chemicals in our body, and we don't know really what those effects are yet.
And I'll chime in real quick. So, and I didn't do this, no, sorry, I didn't do this earlier. But when you think about life cycle again, as was already said, if you think about extraction, so you have chemicals like benzene, volatile compounds, fracking fluid, for example. And so those chemicals can cause, impact immune system, liver, kidney, can cause cancers, neurological effects, and have toxicity effects. Then you get to the process, the refining manufacture. You have benzene, I said polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and styrene. So again, inhalation, ingestion can have some of those same effects, cancers, impact birth weight, as I said, and skin irritation. And then we get to like consumer use. So tires, clothing, plastics, think about BPA. You have metals, persistent organic pollutants you can be exposed to, carcinogens, endocrine disrupting compounds, and also microplastics, was just said. So they can impact your heart, it can be intestinal impacts, neurological impacts, reproductive effects, also cause various cancers, can contribute to diabetes, and again, developmental toxicity. And the waste, as I said already, I mentioned dioxins, you have PAHs as well. And so you can have, cancers again, neurological damage, damage to the immune system, reproductive, nervous, and endocrine systems. So I just wanted to add that real quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Delegate Love.
Thank you, Chair Lehrman. And taking my prompt from the chair after your comments, Kate, you said you had some additional thoughts and comments. Would you share them with us, please?
I am just so glad that you have asked this wonderful question, Delegate Love. I happen to be ready to answer it. I do have one more thought. So we kind of tied in, a lot of people mentioned the example that, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, ways to move forward and some policy recommendations that could make this better. So I'm going to pop it up on my screen and I'll put it in the chat too. This is from our study last year. And so these are sort of the three buckets that from an advocacy perspective, we think about some of the possible solutions. You've heard about most of these throughout the presentations today. From the banning, we know from work we've done across the country, and I'm sure Nicole could add to this as well, as far as we know that the best way to do this really is bans and limitations. With human behavior and the way that we tend to work, this tends to be the best way. We also know, though, that some of the other things we have in here, opposing the creation of new plastic production infrastructure, which really goes into what Dr. Wilson is saying, is we have to take this out, from that piece because of how much it is disproportionately impacting community. Reuse, our second column, right to repair laws, encouraging the use of reusables, of course, and then recycle gets into some of the things people said about really passing the extended producer responsibility laws, because they should, manufacturers should have to think about what's going to happen at the end of the useful life for a lot of these products. Expanding curbside recycling touches on what so many of the county officials brought up, is how can we help make that happen? And then these other pieces about banning food waste goes into some of the conversations around compost. So I'll put this report in the chat, but I appreciate the opportunity to put it up and show what some of the ways we think about this are.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. And a few counties mentioned in their responses extended producer responsibility. And I just wanted folks to know that we are having an entire panel on EPR in the next session of this work group. So we're not just totally ignoring all the counties who said they wanted us to talk about it. So thank you. Any final questions before we close? Well, excellent. So like we said in the beginning, this is the first of 3 conversations that we're having to take a comprehensive look at our waste reduction and recycling and composting here in the state of Maryland. There have been many bills that have increased over the years trying to move Maryland forward in terms of recycling efficacy and composting, and we weren't able to pass some of them this past session, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to work with the sponsors and work with all of you to create a robust package for the next session based on the information that all of you are sharing with us today. So we're really grateful that you've taken the time to be here. We have 2 more sessions, and I will just give a quick preview. In the next session on September 10th, also at 9:30 a.m., we're going to hear from businesses on their view of waste issues from the Maryland Retailers Association, from the Chamber of Commerce, Coca-Cola, Bioenergy DevCo, so several different types of businesses around the state. We're going to hear all about EPR, which is a new acronym that people are throwing around, but that's an old concept. Extended producer responsibility. And we're going to hear from a number of environmental organizations on their thoughts about these issues and why it's so important to them. Our final work group hearing will be on October 9th, where we'll be discussing reuse policies. And we may also, we may also be taking public comment at that one as well. But we're looking forward to continuing this discussion. And thank you again, everybody, for being here. Chair Barve, did you want to close us out or say anything?
No, I just, first of all, thank you, Brooke, for running a great meeting. And I just want to emphasize again that we're kind of going back to the future. When I first got elected, there was this practice of having interim public hearings, and the first law in the United States to ban pre-existing condition limitations came out of the Maryland House of Delegates in 1993, and it was the result of the kind of robust discussions that we've had here on this issue, and we will have in the next 2 meetings. And then, of course, other subcommittees are going to get to work in a similar fashion fashion. And so really, I'm kind of assuming a worst case scenario where we might have another truncated session. Most likely we won't, but we got to be prepared for that sort of eventuality. So Brooke, and to the members of your work group, and also to the other members of the committee and all of the participants, thank you very much for helping to make our interim a very productive one for the next General Assembly session. Thank you. I guess